Order. The Honourable Chief Government Whip on a point of order.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there have been consultations between all parties, and I think you'd find unanimous consent for the following motion, and I'd like to thank all the parties for the negotiations that took place that would allow this. That notwithstanding any standing order or usual practice of this House, Bill C-37, an act to amend the Citizenship Act, be deemed concurred in at report stage and deemed read a third time and do pass.
Does the Honourable Chief Government Whip have the unanimous consent of the House to propose this motion? Agreed. La Chambre l'a entendu.
The House has heard the terms of the motion. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt it?
Adopté.
Agreed and so ordered.
Third reading of this bill, troisième lecture de ce projet de loi.
Orders of the day. Order du jour.
Government orders, government bills. Le projet de loi C-30.
Bill C-39, an act to amend the Canadian Grain Act, Chapter 22 of the Statutes of Canada 1998 and Chapter 25 of the Statutes of Canada 2004.
When this bill was last before the House, the Honourable Member for Malpeque had the floor for questions and comments, and there are 6 minutes remaining in the time allotted to the Honourable Member for questions and comments. Question.
So, questions and comments.
Resuming debate. Reprise de débat. L'Honorable.
The Honourable Member for Argenteuil-Papineau-Mirabel. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to speak today on behalf of the Bloc Québécois on Bill C-39, an act to amend the Canada Grain Act. To start with, I'll give you the Bloc's position, which is in favour, in principle, of this bill, which would modernize the Grain Act. That said, the bill has a number of issues, a number of uncertainties. For example, what will the payment guarantees be replaced by? So we reserve judgment on this bill. We'd like to hear from farmers. Unfortunately, few of them appeared before the Standing Committee on Agriculture. And the bill has no direct effect on Quebec farmers. We'll remain vigilant. The reform of the Grain Act is part of a broader context. The Conservatives are trying to dismantle safeguards that would defend farmers. For example, the wheat board, supply management, and so on. The government appointed a friend of the minister to the wheat board. Is that person going to defend farmers or the minister's interests? So the Bloc has questions. The Bloc notes that the government implements only some of the committee's recommendations, for example, modernizing the Commission's objects, eliminating the weighovers, the mandatory inward inspection and weighing, and so on, eliminating the grain appeal tribunals, eliminating the payment guarantees without knowing what is to replace them, and there's no ombudsman's office created for farmers, which was one of the committee's recommendations. So that, by way of context, the Canada Grain Act has been amended a number of times, but not significantly since the 70s. The last time changes were made was in May 2005. Changes were made to enable Canada to meet its commitments under the World Trade Organization. There have been calls for an exhaustive and an in-depth overview and overhaul of the Canada Grain Act and the Commission. The first, in 2005, Section 2.1 of the bill entered into force, amending the Canada Grain Act and calling for a review of the Commission. A firm of consultants was hired to do this review, and they based themselves on reviews done in the previous 6 years. So this led to broad online consultations with those involved in the industry and public meetings. A report was tabled in the House and the Senate in September 2006, and it was referred to the Agriculture Committee for study. The committee issued its report in December 2006. So the summary of the bill, Bill C-39, which once again would amend the Canada Grain Act. This bill would make it possible to clarify the Canadian Grain Commission's objects, to combine terminal elevators and transfer elevators into a single class of elevators called terminal elevators, to eliminate mandatory inward inspection and weighing, as well as some requirements for weighovers at elevators, extend the right to require the Commission to determine the grade and dockage of grain at process elevators and grain dealers' premises, eliminate the grain appeal tribunals, eliminate the Commission's ability to require security as a condition for obtaining or maintaining a license, creating additional regulatory powers for the Commission, modifying enforcement provisions and creating certain new offenses, and ensuring that some of the requirements and procedures set out are clarified and modernized, and that certain language is updated. This bill also amends an act to amend the Canada Grain Act and the Agriculture and Agri-Food Administrative Monetary Penalties Act, and to repeal the Grain Futures Act, as well as another act, and it includes transitional provisions and coordinating amendments. It's important to summarize how grain is produced in Quebec. In Quebec, grain is produced mainly for domestic use, particularly for a livestock feed. So our producers in Quebec felt no need to come up with a marketing structure, a centralized marketing structure like we have in Western Canada. In Quebec, marketing is governed by Quebec legislation, and there's a board that, at anyone's request, can designate an individual to inspect facilities. And then the board, after that inspection is done, gives notice to the interested party of the results of the inspection. In October 1982, the power was created to negotiate the sale of products, and until recently the mandate of the Farmers Union, the FPCC, when it comes to marketing products, it was relatively stable. In 2005, two-thirds of the farmers covered by this process indicated a desire to centralize their marketing efforts. And so certain sales conditions were put in place for other grains as well in order to create a harmonious situation and consistent pricing. The Quebec Grain Commission covers more than 11,000 Quebec farmers who produce corn, barley, oats, etc., over about 1 million hectares. And they produce about 4 million tons per year for a value of $750 million. But there are certain distinctive features about the use of our grains. Quebec's production is destined largely for niche markets, for soybeans, for example, and a lot of our oats go to the United States. Bill C-39 makes a number of changes to the Canadian Grain Commission. The major issues for grain growers have already been dealt with when the committee issued around 100 recommendations on this issue. In terms of clarifying the Commission's objects, the bill would change the objects so that in addition to farmers' interests, other interests would have to be taken into account, such as processors' interests. And are changes made to how standards are set and how the grade of grain is determined for the purposes both of the domestic and international market. The idea is to protect the interests of farmers when it comes to transferring and storing their grain, and also determining the grade and dockage of grain. Currently, the Commission can impose quality standards for Canadian grains so that the product is reliable, the quality is reliable both in Canada and abroad. Under Section 13 of the Act, the words for the benefit of producers is replaced by setting standards in order to ensure quality control both on the domestic and international market. So for the Bloc Québécois and the Standing Committee on Agriculture, the Bloc's in favour of the objects of the Commission being modernized. The Bloc recognizes that the Canadian Grain Commission has to be able to take into account broader interests such as public health, maintaining the reputation of Canadian producers, and others. The Bloc is sensitive to these concerns and believes that C39 is carefully crafted. But we do have questions that we intend to pursue at committee. The Union of Producers told us, for example, that it's essential to keep the current wording of the bill, which talks about for the benefit of grain producers and quality standards in the handling of grain. The Conservative government, of course, really doesn't like collective marketing mechanisms and tools that allow farmers to get a fair value for their production. They prefer the free market forces. That's part of their ideology. But producers in Quebec and Canada are right to be wary of this government. They would like to dismantle supply management in the dairy and poultry industries. So the Bloc Québécois wants to make sure that any amendments give adequate protection to farmers. So the Bloc will be very vigilant. It's important for this bill to go to committee so that we can study it in depth so that farmers feel well protected. That's what's important, Mr. Speaker, to the Bloc Québécois. If there's any reluctance on the part of farmers when it comes to this bill, the Conservatives will find the Bloc Québécois on their back. So it's important not to politicize this grain commission. It's important that the Canadian quality control system for grains, it's important to have a commission to vouch for the quality of Canadian exports. The commission can't give an impression that its decisions are based on anything other than science and protecting the economic interests of the industry. The Conservative government was very careful in December 2007 in appointing they were very careful to appoint Mr. Edwin Winston, a former Conservative, to the board, and we fear that his proximity to the current Prime Minister undermines the credibility of the Commission. There are very close ties between Mr. Amundsen and the current Agriculture Minister. The minister was the campaign director for Mr. Amundsen in 93. From 93 to 97, he was also the coordinator of his riding office. So there's some very close ties among the minister, the Prime Minister, and this member of the Commission. Will the new commissioner of the Grain Commission defend farmers' interests or those of the minister? That we have reason to wonder. So it's important this points to the need for an ombudsman's office for farmers, and the Bloc Québécois condemns the government for disregarding the committee's recommendation, which was to set up a farmers' ombudsman's office that would report directly to the Minister of Agriculture. This type of ombudsman would ensure that farmers understand their rights under the Act and would defend those interests with other stakeholders. The Parliamentary Committee and the Bloc feel that such an office would have helped defend farmers in dealing with the various players in the industry. And the power to investigate complaints and so on would strengthen the quality control system for grain in Canada.
Now, the Bloc Québécois is reluctant with respect to the appeal part of the bill. This appeal board would receive appeals from various grain producers that are not happy about decisions made by the wheat board, and there would be an authorized inspector acting independently. Other members of the board come from the grain industry. There would be a limit as to the legitimacy of the effectiveness, and Part 14 of the bill would eliminate certain parts of this board, and if there's a decision about the chief, with respect to the chief inspector, producers could not turn to the appeal board. They would have to turn to regular courts in the case of a decision on their appeal. This is very costly, and the Bloc Québécois feels that the committee didn't deal with this particular issue. An appeal board for the wheat board should be applauded because it's so efficient, and this appeal board therefore should be applauded because of its effectiveness, and the board should be respected because of the various roles that it plays with certain types of wheat. We're waiting for the government's response to explain this. It's important for us that this bill be moved on to committee as quickly as possible so that the Bloc Québécois can improve upon it. As to eliminating the inspection aspect, this is what is done by the bill. Services of inspection and weighing are compulsory for any wheat that is being exported, but is not compulsory for wheat that is domestic or going to the United States. There are also terminal silos and transfer silos that are taken into account. The wheat board allows for weighing by third parties so as to avoid any mistakes, and this inspection would happen only if the shipper requested it. However, the weighing for shipping outside the country would be compulsory. Even if the wheat board no longer deals with this optional service, inspectors will be able to use the wheat board when it comes to disputes relating to the grade of the wheat. We agree with an optional inspection that has been suggested by the government. We agree with that provision of the bill because inspection on arrival is not universally required. Such inspection doesn't seem to be required for wheat going to the United States or domestic wheat, and this increases the costs that affect the competitiveness of Canadian wheat growers as well as those who export wheat, and they would like to avoid any unnecessary costs that don't affect their management of their business. There are primary silos belonging to the same undertaking, and the obligation to inspect wheat is maintained at certain levels, which will help with the competitiveness of our products that are exported. However, this could increase unit costs and prices. There should be an economy of scale, and certain small-scale businesses with small lots would find themselves at a disadvantage when it comes to their competitiveness. Requirements for weighing should be at the primary silo. This will help the larger companies because they would not have to pay certain rights, and they could offer better prices to the producers. Also, those who are in a better geographic location will be able to take advantage of certain options, and the Bloc Québécois wants to favor competitiveness in grain handling by helping the smaller businesses, and that is why we feel that the Canadian Wheat Board should be provided with enough funds to provide these services to small handlers or small producers. And what this bill does also, the Wheat Board for some time has been asking license holders to provide guarantees in the case of a bankruptcy. This could be some type of deposit or credit or insurance. The amounts should be enough to cover the reference requirements, that is, the amounts to be paid to producers or to another acceptable financial institution, and there should be a monthly report to the Wheat Board relating to these requirements. In the past, the guarantee amount would be enough to cover most obligations to producers in case of most bankruptcies, but not all of them. Since 1982, 19 businesses have gone bankrupt. In 3 of these cases, the government recovered less than 100%, and one was close to 100%, 98.4. In 2 cases, the Wheat Board had to pay all of the amounts owing to the producers for 2 bankruptcies that hadn't made a deposit, and the Wheat Board made payments on 50 occasions where the guarantee wasn't sufficient. So and the Bloc Québécois as well as the committee feel that there should be an effective mechanism for these guarantees, because these producers are at the very beginning of the chain and they must be protected by contractual guarantees to guard against bankruptcies. And producers in Eastern Canada and in many other areas, the government doesn't demand that the industry participate in this type of guarantee. The Western Barley Growers Association recommended that these costs and advantages be examined. So it's important to understand, Mr. Speaker, that the Bloc Québécois would very much like this bill to move on to committee as quickly as possible so that we can improve upon it in the interest of wheat producers or grain producers, because we have to take a very close look at this position. The act has to be updated, and this bill should be crafted in the interests of all producers, and that is what the Bloc Québécois will do. We intend to respect the interests of the producers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Questions and comments?
Reprise de débat. The honourable member for Edmonton Sherwood Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have just a brief question for this member. During the beginning part of his speech, he mentioned that this bill would in no way affect producers in Quebec. And yet he then proceeded to go on to say that he would be watching it very, very closely, and he would be defending the good of the farmers. Now, Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is that Western farmers, I think, have a sense of wanting to be able to determine their own destiny, and they are telling those of us in the West that they want to have more ability to market their product freely. They want a choice. They want to be able to use the government agency if it's to their advantage, but there are many times, right now for example, where they could get triple the amount of income if they had some marketing freedom. And so I would just like to ask this member how he can justify saying with one side of his mouth that this will not affect them, and by their own declaration, the people over in that corner have consistently over the years that I've been here said they want to get out of Canada, which I regret. I feel so badly about that, but they keep saying that. But now he seems to be so very, very interested in what's happening in Western Canada. So how does he reconcile that?
The honourable member for Argenteuil-Papineau-Mirabel. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My answer will be simple, but I'd like to take this opportunity to explain what is happening in Quebec. We have a Grains Marketing Act in Quebec, and there's a board, and the producers have their own organization in Quebec. But when we look at the bill, and the interest that we have, because Quebec producers are interested in following what is happening, since the Conservative government has demonstrated that when it comes to supply management and the wheat board, all of these systems that were implemented to protect producers, the Conservatives seem to feel that this is against their philosophy. And that's why we're keeping a close eye on them, because Western producers have asked us to intervene, and the members should understand this. As long as we haven't left Canada, the Bloc Québécois will be here to defend the interests of Quebecers, and in this case, the interests of Quebec agricultural producers and those from the rest of Canada who are asking for our help. So if farmers don't feel that they're being protected by this bill, then the Conservatives will find the Bloc Québécois in their path, because anything that involves protecting marketing that has been set up by producers over the years has to be closely watched, and that's why we're hoping this will go to committee quickly so that we can hear the farmers and the producers and improve anything that needs improving so that it will be in their interests. Whenever the Conservatives want to attack marketing or marketing boards, this could have a domino effect. It could start with the wheat board, and then we might see supply management affected, and this would affect Quebec producers. In this particular case, the Union des producteurs agricoles asked the Bloc Québécois to keep a very close eye on this, to protect, in this case, the Western farmers, and we are doing this willingly while we are here, because we wouldn't want this bill to have any other effects on other acts that protect marketing for various other types of agricultural products. Questions and comments?
Reprise de débat.
Resuming debate.
The honourable member for British Columbia Southern Interior.
Wow. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that standing ovation. Full house here this morning. Mr. Speaker, it's important to have this debate. The Canadian Grain Commission is a result of an act of 1912 for 3 grain commissioners to oversee the regulation of the movement of grain from the country elevator to the point where it is loaded for export or processed in Canada. And it's functioned in the interest of farmers. And one of the main reasons that it exists is to retain that quality so that the wheat that we send overseas has that stamp of quality from Canada. Today, there are approximately 700 dedicated employees who arbitrate disagreements over grain and weight, who inspect grain passing in and out of terminal elevators, license and regulate elevators and grain companies, and most important function, they administer the Canadian grading system. Canadian grades are trusted and respected throughout the world, Mr. Speaker, due to the honesty and thoroughness of the Canadian Grain Commission. And I'd just like to point out that here we have specialists, people who have studied, who have learned what they're doing, and they're working on behalf of farmers in Canada. These people, and unfortunately, the bill, the way it stands now, many of these people, approximately 200, stand to lose their jobs in the name of deregulation, privatization. So that's one thing that we have to be aware of. Grades like number 1 or number 2 Canadian Western Red Spring Wheat correspond to established specifications based on measures such as a percentage in the shipment of damaged or broken kernels or other kinds of seeds, and of foreign matter such as dirt, as well as moisture content and the weight of grain. The grains assigned by the Grain Commission are under the control of the Western and Eastern Grain Standards Committees, which meet and make decisions about any changes or additions to the grains which may be necessary because of changing market and crop condition. Each year they also establish standard samples for each grade. So I mention that, Mr. Speaker, just to underline the fact that the Grain Commission has a useful function, and that any time that we want to change or modify the way it works, we have to tread very carefully. what happens is that the bill C-39 as it stands has a potential threat to Canadian grain producers. We know that the Grain Commission has served as an independent referee to settle disputes between Canadian grain producers and the powerful companies which buy and export. And, you know, it's no secret, Mr. Speaker, that our system of doing things in Canada is under attack. When I posed the question to our chief negotiator at the WTO last week during committee, he admitted that, for example, that there is pressure internationally for us to do away with our state trading institutions, namely the Wheat Board, and of course that same pressure is existing to modify or to eventually make the Grain Commission not as serving as it is today. So we have to be careful. The Commission has also served as the body that actually determines the amounts farmers are paid based on the Grain Commission's determination of the weight and quality of grain before it goes to market. These roles will dramatically diminish if C-39 becomes law, leaving producers newly disadvantaged in their dealings with grain companies when it comes to determining grain quantity and quality. The producer can hire a private company to grade and weigh the grain, even though no such companies exist today. The bill would also expose grain producers to financial harm in the event of a grain buyer bankruptcy or refusal to pay. The feeling is among many people who are in the business that this will also undermine Canada's international reputation as an exporter of top quality grain. For example, the proposed elimination of inward inspection will likely result in diminished quality of Canadian grain exports. Currently, inward inspection by Canadian Grain Commission ensures grains of different quality can be segregated to protect higher grades from being diluted by lower quality grain. And it took me a while to kind of wrap my head around this, but I understand that when the grain goes to the elevator, for example, in Vancouver, which I visited a number of times before with my farmer uncle from Saskatchewan, that the grain is put in bins and that quality is retained, and that quality is there because of the outward inspection when that grain then is loaded onto ships. So there's a possibility, the way I understand it, if there's no inward and outward inspection, that there could be a mixture, thereby decreasing the quality of the grain and thereby tarnishing Canada's reputation as an exporter of quality grain. Now, there's something called kernel visual distinguishability, or KVD, which is performed by the Grain Commission with this inward inspection. Now, according to the bill proposes to do away with this. I'll just quote from an article by Mr. Wade Sobkowicz, who is the executive director of the Western Grain Elevators Association. In general, the feeling is that we have to be very careful before doing away with KVD. There are technologies in the process of being worked on, finalized, that can replace this famous black box that we were told at committee. But to date, nothing exists really to replace KVD. Right now, only certain varieties are eligible for a particular class, and KVD means that a trained person can differentiate between the classes through visual inspection. Any grain that contains an excess of varieties outside of the intended class is downgraded to the Canada feed grain. In other words, if I understand this correctly, by having KVD, we are able to retain, with qualified people who understand it, a quality in the grain that we export. KVD is a consideration used by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency when deciding what varieties should be registered. The biggest problem, according to Mr. Sobkowicz, with removing KVD is the obvious one. It exists to protect the farmer because it allows settlement at the time of delivery. And, Mr. Speaker, just as an aside, one of the problems with with this bill, and it goes contrary to one of the recommendations we made in committee, is that it doesn't put the farmer first and foremost. The farmer is lumped into the farmer and all of the other segments of the agriculture industry. So KVD protects the grain handler because the certificate final is based on a visual grading system. It protects the marketer by giving assurances that the customer is receiving what he ordered. It protects the end-use customer by providing confidence that they are receiving grain that meets the processing requirements. And, Mr. Speaker, the Grain Elevators Association isn't saying we have to keep KVD forever, that this is ingrained in stone. What they're saying is, let's be very careful, let's tread lightly, let's make sure that we don't replace something until we have something better to act in the interests of farmers. And I'd just like to say, in noticing what's been happening with this government, is that they appear to be willing to act very quickly, and often I would say recklessly, in regard to the Wheat Board, in regard to the Grain Commission, and yet they seem to drag their feet when it comes to immediate aid that is needed for pork and cattle producers, which we saw during the debate. Somehow government can act quickly if it wants, but if it doesn't want to, then we have the spin that we can't get aid to people right away. And so here, Mr. Speaker, we have to tread very carefully. Alors, pourquoi le projet de loi C39 est...
Why is this bill a bad one? Because instead of asking for a study by a parliamentary committee, members had to use a report prepared by one polling company that was awarded a contract by the government, and this Compass poll, which led to C39, began with a favorable outlook towards deregulation and privatization.
So how can you start a study that it already has a bias? That is, that it's already in favor of regulations. Rather than listening to all sides of the argument, this study is going to be biased. Also, the Canadian Grain Commission has not been able to fulfill its mandate. Is this going to be used as an excuse to privatize? And this is about a phenomenon that we often see. Funding's cut. We've seen the same thing with the health system. The funding's cut, and then everyone complains, oh, things aren't working well. Why? Well, because there's no funding. So we should take a look at the Commission recommendations. The Commission has asked for regular funding so that it can carry out its mandate properly. And I would like to underscore once again, it's the big corporations that are given preferential treatment rather than the farming families. Farmers no longer have their opinions taken into account.
The Farmers Union. And I quote, many of the recommendations in the report would accelerate the economic leverage of large grain companies and railways at the expense of farmers, according to the NFU. The mandate of the Canadian Grain Commission since the Act was first implemented in 1912 has recognized that farmers have less power in the marketplace and need certain protection. The spokesman, Terry Boehm, noted that the Compass report specifically recommends narrowing the mandate to protect producers' rights from a broad, overarching principle down to some very specific limits. Boehm refuted the claim by the authors of the Compass report that they have heard no positive feedback about the Canadian Grain Commission during their consultation process. Such a claim is categorically not accurate, said Boehm, particularly given our direct experiences at the public meetings in Saskatoon and Regina. grain producers at both those meetings unequivocally expressed support for the Canada Grain Commission, particularly the role of the assistant commissioners. Now, I'd like to take an aside here, Mr. Speaker, and tie this in to what we've been experiencing with the whole debate on the Canadian Wheat Board. We've been told, and we're told time and time again by this government, that we have to move ahead for marketing choice. We have to dismantle single desk. That really, no farmers are wanting this choice at this point in time. And yet, in my office, I have over 700 letters from people who say, and these are individual letters, some handwritten, some typed, that are saying that we have to be careful, that they don't want to do away with the Canadian Wheat Board and the single desk. And then the spin we get from this government here is that, well, look, they all came from the same facts. Well, certainly. They're from members of the National Farmers Union. The National Farmers Union provides a service to its members. A member sends a letter, and the Farmers Union faxes it to MPs or to myself or to other MPs. These are not form letters. These are individual letters, and many gut-wrenching letters saying, what are you doing? Why are you moving so quickly to destroy the Canadian Wheat Board? And I'd like to say that that is the same sentiment that there is out there among many farmers in regard to the Grain Commission. Now let's move further. An article from the Winnipeg Free Press, when we see our minister who's going against this, has decided not to work with the board of directors of the Canadian Wheat Board, and is actually threatening to introduce legislation within, I think he said, 10 days if he doesn't get his way. Now, Mr. Speaker, since I got onto the Ag Committee and since I've taken this file, I've always thought, well, how nice it would be if the current minister or the previous minister would really sit down with those elected officials who are there on behalf of farmers, would really sit down with all farmers' organizations, especially with an organization such as the National Farmers Union, which represents thousands and thousands of farmers, and sit down and hammer out a solution and try to work with the system as it is. And we see that the Wheat Board is trying to introduce new programs. The majority of the board directors want the feds and the malt barley industry to give their new Cash Plus barley marketing initiative a chance. The program seeks to put more money into farmers' hands sooner than with the current pooling system. So it's not as if the Wheat Board directors are stuck in a time zone. They understand what's happening, but at the same time, they want to ensure that the market power stays with the farmers and that they are not thrown out to the mercy of the big multinationals. And it's disturbing, Mr. Speaker, when we see a minister who gives ultimatums, and I quote from this article in the Winnipeg Free Press, "They can lead, follow, or get the hell out of the way," he said. Now, Mr. Speaker, what is that? What kind of a statement is that from the Minister of Agriculture of our country? And then we move on. I received yesterday a letter from the President of the National Farmers Union, who is extremely upset over the comments made by the Parliamentary Secretary to the Wheat Board in the debate the other night. And it's incredible. He's saying that, and I quote from the paragraph, "One of your other defamatory allegations in the same emergency debate is that acting as the President of the National Farmers Union, I have disappeared on this issue this year." Again, although you know this is to be opposite to the truth, I have attached my recent press releases on the CWB issue as you are pretending that you haven't seen them. You seem to think you can mislead your fellow members of the House of Commons, and this is a further disgrace to yourself and your party. In the last paragraph, he poses a question to the Parliamentary Secretary. Do you have the integrity required to stand in the House of Commons and apologize to your colleagues and then make a further apology to me for your unsubstantiated, defamatory, and incorrect remarks? And I pose the question to the Parliamentary Secretary of the Wheat Board. Does he have the integrity to do this? And I hope that when we come back to the House that he will, in fact, stand and apologize. Because, Mr. Speaker, it's time to work in a spirit of cooperation. Farmers want to work in a spirit of cooperation with this government. This government is doing some good things. It's not a time for confrontation. It's not a time for shenanigans, as we have seen, we saw yesterday in committee, where the Parliamentary Secretary for Agriculture tried to stop debate on Bill C-33 and rush it through right into the House, even though he knew that there were witnesses lined up to hear, because this is an important issue. The issue of biofuels isn't just something that we move through. It's got to be looked at and at least put on the record that there are concerns. And thankfully, we have a chairman with integrity in the committee that stood up and made the right decision, and I would like to applaud him for this. So, Mr. Speaker, I think I have a few more minutes. I'd just like to quote from a letter from the organization Save My Canadian Wheat Board, dated January the 18th. C-39 includes some of the amendments proposed in the review and is sure to cause further controversy. For one, it proposes to remove the phrase from the Act that requires the Canada Grain Commission to regulate the entire grain industry in the interests of grain producers, instead of the focus of the Act being the protection and the promotion and interest of grain producers. The interest of producers that will be protected by the Act are spelled out specifically and narrowly. And that's one example from friends of the group Save My Canadian Wheat Board. Also, I quote further on in the letter, likely to be highly controversial and certainly not recommended by the 2006 review, C-39 removes the requirement that companies wishing to be licensed by the Grain Commission as primary elevators must post adequate security to cover potential losses farmers may incur if the company goes bankrupt. The security posted by companies in the past has not always been adequate, but it has certainly protected farmers from huge losses in some cases. And I would like to, once again, emphasize, Mr. Speaker, that we have to, before we move quickly, we have to take the precautionary approach, which often this government has not done in dealing with health, in dealing with environment, and now in dealing with the lives of farmers and our grain industry. The precautionary approach means that we tread very carefully before we move in to throwing something out and bringing something new where we're not really quite certain what the future will bring, especially, Mr. Speaker, in light of the fact that today in the world we know that there is this thrust, this feeling that Canada, that other countries, the WTO, wants us to do away with any protection we have for farmers. That protection is not, that threat is not only on the Canadian Wheat Board, but on supply management. On supply management also, we see that. So, Mr. Speaker, I would like to conclude by saying the bill as it currently stands certainly does not receive the support of me and my party, and I hope that we have a chance to look at it and turn it into a bill that reflects the interests of all farmers in Canada. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's great to be able to get up on this issue one more time, and I actually want to address some of the accusations that the member made against me, but first, I really actually think I need to suggest to him, and I know many of my colleagues would suggest to him as well, that he needs to go to more than just the NDP's farm wing, the NFU, for his advice. He needs to get a little broader perspective of the agricultural industry, particularly in Western Canada. But just with regards to his comments about what I said the other night, I found it very strange. Mr. Speaker, I've always been a strong advocate of organic farming in Western Canada. I think it presents some great opportunities. That's why I was extremely puzzled when Mr. Stuart Wells claimed that I had defamed him the other night when I called him, get this, Mr. Speaker, an organic farmer. Anyway, it seemed to be an extremely strange response from him and the National Farmers Union, unless you know, Mr. Speaker, that this year the Canadian Wheat Board has given virtually a zero buyback to organic farmers, so they can buy their grain back and they can market it however they are. Now, I'm told that Mr. Wells, I'm told by his neighbors that he's an organic farmer, and he refuses to answer the question as to whether he is or not, because, Mr. Speaker, if he is, he's able to take advantage of that opportunity. And 98% of farmers in Western Canada cannot access that same buyback. They cannot access the ability to market their own grain. So my question to Mr. Wells has been, are you an organic farmer? If you are an organic farmer, have you been able to take advantage of the buyback? And if so, why have you not stood up and suggested that it would be good for the rest of Western Canadian farmers to have the same opportunities that you do? And so those are simply the questions that I was raising the other night. The NFU's extremely aggressive, angry response to me tells me that maybe he needs to answer those questions, that he's trying to avoid answering the questions as to whether he's an organic farmer, whether he's been able to take advantage of that tremendous opportunity that's been offered by the buyback that the rest of us would love to have. And I know that if Mr. Wells is not an organic farmer, Mr. Speaker, I would be glad to apologize to him for that, but I also understand that if he's not one, he's probably wishing he was one so he could take advantage of the tremendous opportunities that organic farmers have because they can market their own grain this year. So I would like the member from the NDP to explain to the House today why they would be taking a position that would allow some farmers in Western Canada to buy their grain back for 8 cents and then market it themselves, which we think is a tremendous thing, and then tell other farmers you can't even get a buyback, you can take a price from the Canadian Wheat Board that's less than a half of what organic farmers are getting.
Shame. Honourable Member for British Columbia Southern Interior.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for his question. This debate on the Wheat Board and the position we're getting from the government has been, we've heard it over and over again. The fact remains that there are many hundreds and thousands of farmers who do support the system, the Canadian Wheat Board, the way it functions today. And they have an elected, democratically elected board of directors, and any changes made to that organization has to be made by farmers and not by some kind of heavy-handed approach that this government is taking. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Malpeque.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciated the well-researched remarks by the member for British Columbia Southern Interior, and I, in fact, agree with him when he stated that the government does move really rapidly in areas such as trying to destroy the Canadian Wheat Board, which they're attempting to do, moving rapidly in terms of trying to weaken the Canadian Grain Commission. And now the minister's ridiculous announcement, Mr. Speaker, to do away with KVD by August 1st of this year, which industry, the Canadian Wheat Board, everybody in the system except the right-wing friends of the parliamentary secretary over there, claim it shouldn't be done until 2010, or it'll completely disrupt the industry, and it will in fact put Canada at risk in terms of supplying the quality grain that it has a reputation to do around the world. However, Mr. Speaker, as the member mentioned, the government is absolutely missing in action when it comes to responding to the beef and hog crisis. They're missing in action. Why can't they move rapidly in that area? Well, let me turn, Mr. Speaker, to the specific bill we're talking about, Bill C-39 on the Canadian Grain Commission. Again, what we see from this government is undermining the authority of farmers again. The original Canadian Grain Act, Mr. Speaker, has in it the mandate is in the interests of producers. The new bill takes that out, because that crowd on the other side, Mr. Speaker, is not really interested in doing anything in the interest of producers. It shows. They're undermining them with the Canadian Wheat Board. They're undermining them with the Canadian Grain Commission. They're missing in action in hogs and beef. And so they're turning over the authority of the Canadian Grain Commission to the interests of industry rather than producers. And I'd like to ask the honourable member his point of view on that. In fact, the other problems with the bill is they're taking away the appeals tribunal, of which there was 2,000 appeals last year. There's no report to Parliament, Mr. Speaker, in this bill. They're taking away that right so that Parliament won't know what's going on with the Canadian Grain Commission and Canadian Grain Act. And they're taking away the necessity of posting a bond, of grain companies having to post a bond to protect producer interests. They're even taking that away. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to get the members' comments on that critique of, number one, the bill, and certainly the critique of a government that is missing in action when it comes to developing real solutions for farmers in this country. In fact, they like to say they put farmers first, but, Mr. Speaker, everything they're doing is putting farmers absolutely last.
Member for British Columbia Southern Interior.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my honourable colleague from Malpeque for his comments, and I'd just like to emphasize that sometimes he gets criticized because he's from Prince Edward Island, but I'd like to assure the House that this member in the past, in his capacity as president of a National Farmers Union and also as MP, has crisscrossed this country probably hundreds of times, and he understands the agriculture situation in this country. In regard to his comments, well, I agree with what he's saying. This is a flawed bill. It's a flawed process, and it's going to take gradual power away from farmers. So we have to look very carefully at it. In regard to missing in action, I think this government could get back into action by consulting with all groups in this country, and not just its friends, not just the ones that support its particular ideological point of view. Mr. Speaker, as parliamentarians, sometimes we have to rise above our ideological differences, and we all have them. That's why we belong to different political parties. And we have to then look in the interests of farmers, and I would suggest that maybe this minister and our government could maybe have another consultation with all groups, not just its friends, but groups such as the National Farmers Union and other people, just to see what are farmers saying. You know, these letters that we get, they're not form letters. They're people who are concerned, and sometimes I get the feeling that the minister and this government just isn't paying attention. And we certainly have got that feeling in regard to the pork and cattle industry, where to this very date, there are people who aren't getting assistance that they need. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order. I believe it's time to proceed now with statements by members. Déclaration des députés. Accordingly, I call upon the honourable member for Tobic-Mactaquac.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This year marks the 100th anniversary of the Association of Certified General Accountants of Canada. I've been a member of this association since 1993. This association is recognized both in Canada and abroad for the professional development it provides its members and students, and for advancing the accounting profession.
CGAs are heralded for their excellent professional standards, as well as the integrity and ethics they provide all sectors of Canada's economy, including industry, commerce, and government, both as employees and as practitioners. CGA Canada representatives play leading roles in developing solutions to important domestic and international issues, including productivity, sustainability, and trade, among others. Mr. Speaker, I am very proud to hold a CGA designation, and I know all my colleagues in the House will join me in congratulating CGA Canada on achieving this very important milestone. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Député d'Ottawa.
The Honourable Member for Ottawa-Vanier.
Part of our community on Rideau Street, a cultural institution called the Bytown Cinema, which has carved for itself an enviable and well-deserved reputation. At this time of year, when film awards loom, you'll often see lineups outside the Bytown. Why? Because more often than not, the Bytown has found those pearls the public loves and the cinema chains have neglected. This is due mostly to the cinematic flair of Bruce White, the Bytown owner, whom I wish to congratulate. Thank you, Mr. White, for the happy mix of Indies, foreign, and Canadian productions. Thank you for Le Fabuleux Destin d'Amélie Poulain, The March of the Penguins, Vol Vert, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and for this year's Persepolis, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, Away from Her, La Vie en Rose, and 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days. And Mr. Speaker, next time the Bytown features the Rocky Horror Picture Show, go. It's worth the price of admission and then some.
L'Honorable Député de
The Honourable Member for Repentigny. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I tabled almost 10,000 postcards to the Prime Minister condemning this government's refusal to pay full retroactive guaranteed income supplement. I also tabled with my colleague a bill to provide for full retroactivity and an increase to the GIS. Our claims are supported by organizations who've seen that seniors are going through a crisis. Seniors know it, and they're not fooled. They have long memories, and they'll remember this government, which gave them hope and then took it away. This government that has the means to refund the money they're owed, and this Conservative government that stubbornly refuses to give them back what was taken from them. This is another battle that the Bloc Québécois will wage on behalf of seniors. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, the Canadian Breast Cancer Network is a survivor-directed national network of organizations and individuals. Sadly, over 5,000 Canadian families will lose a loved one this year due to breast cancer, while 22,000 more women will be diagnosed. We as a country have to do everything we can and use all the tools at our disposal to make cancer history. While I welcome the government's change of heart to reverse its decision in regard to the cuts by this government and the previous government to the Canadian Breast Cancer Network, Mr. Speaker, I and the women affected by breast cancer across this country must have a guarantee that the Canadian Breast Cancer Network will have cash in hand on April 1st. This organization has faced cutback after cutback and cannot wait at the government's pleasure for funding that was needed yesterday to help women and their families affected by breast cancer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Calgary East.
Mr. Speaker, Canada was very disappointed by the recent statements made by the Russian leaders, including President Putin, stating that they would aim nuclear weapons at Ukraine if it joined NATO and allowed U.S. missile defense assets on its territory. Such statements are a source of preoccupation in Canada as well as with the Euro-Atlantic community. Even if it couched in hypothetical terms, the threat gives us a cause for considerable concern. As a matter of fundamental principle, the use of such threats is unacceptable. Moreover, it is not consistent with the positive relationships we have been striving to develop in the post-Cold War environment. Our response is firm. The sovereignty and independence of Ukraine are not to be questioned. Ukraine is free and must remain free to choose the foreign policy course that suits its aspirations. In this respect, it can count on Canada's unquestionable support. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth Cole Harbour.
Mr. Speaker, it's hard to take this government seriously on post-secondary education. The Liberal government invested in students after we cleaned up the mess of the last Conservative government. Millennium Scholarships, Canada Access Grants, Learning Bonds, graduate scholarships, and more. This government throws some money to the provinces and then gives an $80 tax credit to students. Wow. How about Canada student loans? The minister says he has something in the budget. He should look at the recommendations of Julian Benedict and the Coalition for Student Loan Fairness. Reduce the rate of interest, make the system more open and accessible, and better meet the needs both of our students and the productivity of the nation. And he should stop collecting loans from the families of the dead. And what is the minister hiding on income contingent loans? Why did he block an ATIP for 11 months and then refuse to release the information? What could he be hiding? This government doesn't listen to students, doesn't understand students, and doesn't seem to care much about them either. This government promises everything and delivers nothing, and students are not hopeful that that will change anytime soon.
The Honourable Member for Oshawa.
Mr. Speaker, coming from Oshawa, you realize the automotive sector is very important to me and my constituents. I'm very proud that our government continues to work very hard with this very important sector. Mr. Speaker, I rise in the House today with some good news for Canadians and our very important auto sector. China was not abiding by their commitment to provide non-discriminatory access for the imports of their auto parts, leading to high and unnecessary tariffs costing our automotive sector hundreds of millions of dollars. Our government took action. We joined forces with the United States and the European Union, and together we filed a complaint against China with the WTO. Today, the initial ruling was delivered, and the WTO agrees with us. As our Minister of International Trade said yesterday, this is a move in the right direction. Mr. Speaker, this is another way that our government is getting things done for Canadians and for our Canadian auto sector. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Bruno-Saint-Hubert. In the context of Black History Month, I'd like to let you know about a cherished cause of Mr. Leo Kobe-Vero, a South Shore resident who's always cared deeply about the integration of Black people. He's currently trying to raise the profile of a great Black artist of the 18th century who's been forgotten by history, classical composer Joseph Bologne de Saint-Georges, nicknamed the Chevalier de Saint-Georges. To this end, Mr. Vero created and heads up the Chevalier de Saint-Georges Society. In addition to being A phenomenal violinist, Saint-Georges was also a talented composer of string quartets, symphonie concertante, and quatuor concertant. He also was a director of a symphony orchestra. Nicknamed the Black Mozart, Saint-Georges will take his fair place in history thanks to the tenaciousness of Leo Kobe-Vero. Bravo.
Honourable Member for Stormont, Dundas, South Glengarry.
Mr. Speaker, on this day, 43 years ago, the red and white maple leaf flag was first raised in Parliament Hill, across Canada, and at Canadian embassies around the world. La fête des rêves éclatante qui orne notre drapeau.
The celebration, this event was a very significant one, and now the maple leaf unites all Canadians. It's admired all around the world because it's a symbol of freedom, democracy, the rule of law, and human rights.
Celebrating Canada's significant events and symbols is integral to the foundation of our historical memory and contributes to the identity, cohesion, and sense of belonging of Canadians. I encourage Canadians to join together to celebrate this treasured symbol. National Flag of Canada Day is a perfect opportunity to embrace our shared identity and to reflect on our good fortune to live in the greatest country in the world, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Mississauga East, Cooksville.
Today, Canadians celebrate National Flag of Canada Day. 43 years ago, the maple leaf flew for the first time over this Parliament and over the nation it represents. Cette journée devrait être l'occasion.
This day should give all Canadians a chance to remember what our flag represents.
As we all share this iconic symbol, the national treasures and common values it signifies are shared with all of us. We all feel the respect and friendship the maple leaf attracts when we travel abroad. We all cherish the universal education and health systems that we share at home. And we all honor the current and future veterans whose sacrifice give future generations the freedom and privilege that comes with life under the maple leaf. Je demande donc.
So I ask all my colleagues on this National Flag of Canada Day to join me in celebrating this chance we have to recall what we've accomplished in the past and to look forward to an exciting future together under our flag.
The Honourable Member for Peace River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 78 days ago, the Tackling Violent Crime was sent to the Senate for consideration. Ever since it arrived in the Liberal-dominated Senate, it's been held up from passage. As a father, I am concerned about the delay tactics that may jeopardize the passage of these important measures that will better protect my family.
Hear, hear.
This week, while opposing the Tackling Violent Crime bill, the Liberal Senator Sharon Carstairs expressed her desire to legalize youth prostitution.
Unbelievable.
I would like to remind the Liberal Senator that youth prostitution is already illegal. The age of consent is 18 years where sexual activity involves exploitative activity such as prostitution. Our bill is about protecting children from the most vile and horrific crimes that can be committed.
Hear, hear.
As a father, I called on the Liberal senators to stop their delay and to quickly pass this piece of legislation that will help protect the children of Canada.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member for Sault Ste. Marie.
Mr. Speaker, public health care is in crisis. A shortage of staff, beds, millions of Canadians without doctors. In Sault Ste. Marie, 12 emergency physicians have warned they will withdraw their services as of April 1st, citing unsafe patient conditions and too few doctors. The hospital CEO calls it the worst situation he has seen. This is happening coast to coast to coast. Our party has campaigned for long-term care and home care programs to help alleviate this hospital crisis. We have called for innovative solutions, a healthcare training fund to add 16,000 practitioners as quickly as possible, a national tracking and assessment authority, multidisciplinary teams including nurse practitioners, retaining healthcare professionals, accommodating foreign-trained workers, helping students with financial relief. Let's stop giving big business the corporate tax breaks that don't help Canadians, and let's spend the money on healthcare.
The Honourable Member for Esquimalt, Juan de Fuca.
Mr. Speaker, my constituents of Esquimalt-Wantapuka have a few questions for this Conservative government. Why haven't they implemented a national plan to address our healthcare workforce crisis, implement a national Head Start daycare program for children, or roll out a plan to protect Canadian jobs and our economy from the storm clouds ahead? Why has this government massively overspent, bringing our country to the edge of a deficit? Why have they shafted our Navy, robbing pensioners of their hard-earned savings through the income trust fiasco, which has caused a massive sell-off of Canadian firms to foreign buyers? Where is their plan to address substance abuse, or tackle organized crime, or remove interprovincial trade barriers, or in my riding, provide the resources for the ENN Railway to run effectively, or for Victoria to have a light rail transit system? Why has this new Conservative dictatorship trampled on the pillars of our democracy in Canada? My electors in Esquimalt-Wantapuka, indeed all Canadians, want to know.
The Honourable Député de Gatineau.
The Honourable Member for Gatineau. Mr. Speaker, on the Official Languages Committee, the Conservatives are systematically obstructing an invitation to the Minister to appear. This counterproductive strategy flies in the face of the principle of ministerial responsibility. The Conservatives' disrespectful comments to opposition members to delay the motion show once again their ideology when it comes to respect for procedure. We're dealing with the renewal of the action plan on official languages, and the minister must be heard. This coalition of reformers, alliance members, progressive conservatives, and failed liberals shows how much disharmony they cause on the committee. Not so long ago, the Conservatives were cancelling meetings to debate the Court Challenges program, refusing to invite the minister to discuss the renewal of the action plan. It's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. It's filibuster and obstruction. The Honourable Member for Sydney, Victoria.
Speaker, the Chaco Valley Vikings of Vanderhoof, British Columbia, won the 27th annual New Waterford Coal Bowl Classic basketball tournament final at Breton Education Centre in Sydney, in New Waterford. This year's Coal Bowl was another great success thanks to the many volunteers and sponsors. The New Waterford Coal Bowl Classic is a premier national invitational boys high school basketball tournament. But it's more than that, Mr. Speaker. It's a celebration of culture, academics, and of course sportsmanship. This year, 10 teams in attendance from all across Canada volunteered in a local grocery store to raise money for the families of the 7 members of the Bathurst High School Phantoms basketball team who were killed in a tragic motor vehicle accident last month. And I'm pleased to report that the team raised over $2,000 for the Boys in Red Memorial Fund established after the tragic accident. Congratulations to all, and a job well done.
The Honourable Member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Mr. Speaker, we are listening. We've listened to the provinces and the territories. We've listened to the municipalities' desire to have long-term, flexible and predictable funding for infrastructure needs. We delivered the Building Canada Fund. Yes, Mr. Speaker, world-class action to provide world-class infrastructure for this country. We must work together to correct the infrastructure deficit left by the previous Liberal government. Building Canada is a $33 billion, 7-year plan. $17.6 billion going directly to the municipalities via the GST rebate and the gas tax fund. Working together, Building Canada means a partnership. Municipalities asked us to extend the gas tax fund, and in Budget 2007 we acted. We extended it to 2014 and raised it to $2 billion a year. Mr. Speaker, the previous Liberal government left this issue on the back burner. Our menu is clear: building a better, stronger Canada.
Oral questions. Questions orales. The Honourable Member for Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, does the government agree that Canada's mission in Kandahar, which must change to one of training, reconstruction and development in February of 2009, must also have a clear end date in February of 2011, not a vague approximation around 2011, and not just a review date, a clear end date in February of 2011. Does the government agree with that?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, throughout the process of working on developing our Canadian position on the future of our mission in Afghanistan, we've been trying to build a bipartisan consensus through the work of the Manley panel, headed up by a former Liberal Deputy Prime Minister, a motion that we put on the table. We've since had, we sought input on that, and we've since had some further input from the Liberal Party. We're very pleased to see there is a considerable amount of common ground between the parties, and we now have what I think can be truly called not a Liberal position or a Conservative position, but a Canadian consensus. Part of that consensus is a view that the mission should end in 2011.
The honourable member for Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, the House will begin a debate on Afghanistan a week from Monday. It must follow an open, transparent process. It must be serious, thoughtful, and substantive. I would ask the Government House Leader, how many days of debate is the Government prepared to devote to this vital topic beyond the 2 days that have now been scheduled? And what exactly will the House be debating? Will the Government accept the terms of the Liberal amendment?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, with regard to the latter part of the question, we were very pleased to see the input from the Liberal Party and the position that was provided in their motion earlier this week. As I indicated, there is considerable common ground on the most fundamental questions about the future of the mission in Afghanistan. Of course, the most fundamental of those questions is, do you wish to see the military mission in Afghanistan continue beyond 2009? On that issue, there is common ground between the two major parties in the House of Commons. The other parties, the Bloc Québécois and the NDP, have a different view. That's fine, that's fair. But the important part is that we have worked towards a consensus. We will debate that in this House, but the most important thing is to arrive at a Canadian position that honours the commitments we have made in Afghanistan.
The honourable member for Wascana.
Speaker, the existing commitments run until 2009. It is important to know the change that will occur after 2009. The Government left discussions with NATO about new and additional troops to the very last minute, and now there's a mad scramble. Specifically, Mr. Speaker, which NATO allies have been approached bilaterally so far? Specifically, which ones? What clear commitments have been made to date, if any? And when will we know for sure? Parliament needs full disclosure of what this Government knows or doesn't know.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, there have been, as the Minister of Defence and the Prime Minister have reported in the past, been ongoing dialogue with our NATO allies at NATO meetings over the years and bilateral discussions. The Afghan mission is, of course, one of our most important commitments, and our commitment to our NATO partners is obviously our most important military and security alliance that we enjoy. So we continue to do that. The Prime Minister has regularly reported publicly and to this House on his discussions with other national leaders like the Prime Minister of Great Britain, the President of France, the Prime Minister of Germany, and the like, and we will continue to do that. What is important, though, is that we do have an element of burden sharing from our allies. That's something I know that the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party have in common.
Honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, Liberals believe that key to the success of the Afghan mission is honesty and clarity with Canadians. And that's a very different approach than what we've seen so far from this government. Our amended motion calls on the government to provide franker and more frequent reporting to Canadians about the mission. Will the Prime Minister commit his government to this kind of transparency about this mission to Canadians?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, of course, we are very committed to transparency and openness on this mission. We always have been. We have, under this government, had, I believe, now there have been 10 technical briefings on the mission in Afghanistan. I believe 9 of them have been under this government. We have now instituted that we will have those on a very regular basis so that we can provide in a very technical and open fashion away from the political debate and in a realm where people are hearing from the individuals that are involved on the ground in the mission in Afghanistan and elsewhere in running it, the kind of information that the Canadian public would like to hear. That's something that
the Honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, today Canadians have seen only secrecy and cover-up from this government when it comes to the Afghanistan mission. The issue of detainee abuse and torture is a very good example. Canadians' faith in the Afghan mission is undermined when troubling reports of abuse in the Afghan prisons emerged. And what was the response from this government? Batten down the hatches and mum's the word. Will the Prime Minister guarantee Canadians that this reign of secrecy about this Afghan mission is over and operate with transparency and openness both to Parliament and to Canadians.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, one of the most encouraging elements of common ground between the Leader of the Liberal Party and this government on the future of the mission in Afghanistan was his statement earlier this week that he did not believe politicians should be dictating operational decisions to our soldiers in the field. That has been the position of this government in the question of Taliban prisoners and those who have been taken by our soldiers in the field. I'm glad to see that the Leader of the Liberal Party now agrees with us on the importance of those decisions and what information is disclosed being an operational question for the armed forces, and I think that that's an important piece of common ground we have arrived at.
The Honourable
Member for Joliette. Mr. Speaker, a report by an environmental defense organization says that the oil sands is the most damaging project for the environment, and it could undo all the good that has been done to reduce greenhouse gases elsewhere in Canada. The Conservatives are turning the back on Kyoto. Instead of helping the oil companies to the detriment of future generations and the environment, will the government finally have a real plan to counter greenhouse gases and global warming? The Parliamentary Secretary.
The government does have a plan. It's the Turning the Corner plan, and it's the first time in Canadian history where we have a plan that requires it's a mandatory targets, Mr. Speaker, that includes all industries. All the major polluters, emitters of greenhouse gas emissions will have to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, Mr. Speaker, and that includes the oil sands.
Right on. Very good.
The Honourable Member for Joliette. Mr. Speaker, the Parliamentary Secretary should know that a true plan to counter global warming means absolute targets for greenhouse gas reduction and not intensity targets that will allow the oil sands industry to double its emissions by 2020. Does the Minister not understand that the government must align with Kyoto and have a plan with absolute targets? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment.
Speaker, the member is wrong. The Turning the Corner plan is absolute reductions, Mr. Speaker, and those reductions are 20% by 2020, Mr. Speaker. That is the toughest plan in Canadian history. The big question is, why is the Bloc opposed to reductions in greenhouse gas emissions? Mr. Speaker, in reality, they've never done anything to help the environment.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont La Petite Patrie. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives are finally adopting part of the recommendations made by the Bloc Québécois for reducing phosphates to counter the blue algae problem. The Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment says that NOx also encourages the proliferation of this algae. Does the Minister of the Environment intend to agree with the Bloc Québécois and go back to the drawing board so as to have a truly effective plan to reduce NOx emissions? The Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment.
Speaker, I want to thank that member. Blue-green algae is a very serious problem in Canada, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to an announcement that will be coming up today, Mr. Speaker, and I encourage that member to wait. There will be a good announcement. It's another example of this government getting things done and cleaning up an environmental mess left by the previous government.
The Honourable
Member for Rosemont La Petite Patrie. Mr. Speaker, the real changes didn't come from the Conservative side, but from this side of the House, from the Bloc Québécois. All industries using NOx or emitting NOx must reduce their production, and only the oil sands are exempt, and they can even increase their NOx emissions by 5% for the same time frame. Will the minister stop giving these privileges to the oil companies and ensure that they will reduce their pollution in order to help our lakes survive? The Parliamentary Secretary.
The reality is that this government has turned the corner on no action. Mr. Speaker, this government is a government of action on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and cleaning up environment, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, we have a contest between the Bloc and the NDP who can be Captain Bluster, Mr. Speaker. In reality, the Bloc has never got it done.
The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, you'll never get the politics out of polling if you let ministers and their political staff dole out these lucrative contracts to their political friends. The Conservatives used to scream bloody murder over Liberal polling mischief. Now Senator Porkchop over there wants to allow a system that invites abuse and political interference, all hidden behind the secrecy of cabinet confidence. Why don't the Conservatives clean up public opinion of polling once and for all and keep their hands off and their nose out of the tendering practice for public opinion polling?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my friend for that question because, as he observed, it's a really, really tough job cleaning up the mess we inherited. Federal Accountability Act went a long way, but you know what? The job still isn't done. We discovered to our alarm that there is still an extraordinarily high amount of public opinion polling being done at a bureaucratic level, and we think that that's far too much spending on public opinion polling being done. That's why we're moving to significantly reduce the amount of spending now that we have been able to uncover where it is, and we will continue to do that to make sure that taxpayers' dollars are respected and polling is minimized and used only in ways that are appropriate.
The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Notwithstanding the abuse in polling contracts, the Minister of Finance is supposed to be the guardian of the public purse, the protector of the nation's finances. Yet what are Canadians to think when he squanders $122,000 on a single speech in an untendered contract to an old political crony? When it comes to the rules, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance has broken every one. He threw the rule book right out the window when it came to tendering. I want to know what kind of sanctions, what kind of discipline is being meted out on the Minister of Finance for breaking every rule in the books when it comes to tendering contracts.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we've talked about this before, about these contracts, and the honourable member certainly underestimates the amount of work that went into putting the budget speech together. In fact, the entire budget for 2007. I would invite the honourable member to look on the website. These are all detailed in obvious fashion for the honourable member to see, but what we don't see detailed is the expenditures of the Liberal Party, the $40 million we're still looking for. We can't find that on any website, Mr. Speaker.
That's right. Honourable member for St. John.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today the Leader of the Opposition announced that all future surpluses over and above a $3 billion contingency fund will be used to address the massive infrastructure deficit facing Canada. This funding will be over and above the gas tax transfer, the GST rebate, and all other future infrastructure programs. Will the Transport Minister finally see the light? Will he see that his failing Canada plan is simply not enough? And will he endorse the Liberal plan for Canada's infrastructure future?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, there's no question that the Liberal plan would put us into a deficit situation. But let's talk about something, Mr. Speaker, that was said by the FCM President Gord Steeves, and I quote, "The Prime Minister received a warm reception from our delegates who responded enthusiastically to his government's important investment in infrastructure," end quote. That's probably, Mr. Speaker, because $33 billion is the most allocated by any government in Canada's immediate history. And, Mr. Speaker, that's Conservative-managed dollars. Unlike Liberal-managed dollars, Mr. Speaker, we know what happens that way. $1 million to this friend, $1 million for that Liberal election. That's not going to happen.
The Honourable Member for St. John.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities has already passed judgment on this Liberal plan, and they like what they see. Just moments ago, FCM President Gord Steeves had this to say about the plan: bold, visionary, and with the potential to change the face on our country. They didn't say that about the Conservative plan. The Liberal plan is exactly what municipalities want and what our country desperately needs. Why does the Transport Minister not trust our mayors to invest in our communities?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, there's no question that it would change the face of Canada because it would put us into a huge deficit. But indeed, Mr. Speaker, we were elected more than 2 years ago in relation to run this country, and we are doing so, Mr. Speaker. Let's look at what's happening in Toronto, for instance. The previous Liberal government left us with a $130 billion deficit across this country. And you know what we're doing for Toronto, Mr. Speaker? Already $2 billion for transit. We're answering the question for municipalities and Canadians, Mr. Speaker. We're getting the job done.
The
Honourable Member for Lac Saint-Louis. Mr. Speaker, according to Statistics Canada, the average age of waste treatment plants in Quebec is the oldest in Canada, and this threatens our waterways. And the Concord Bridge collapsing should have been a clear signal to the Conservative government, because 60% of bridges in Quebec have gone beyond their useful lifespan. Now, apparently, the government has already done enough for infrastructures, and we should look elsewhere. When will the government stop treating our mayors like beggars? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport. Thank you very much for the question. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to point out that $33 billion has been granted by the Conservative government to Canada's infrastructure. The Conservative government supports Canada in these demands. The Honourable Member for Lac Saint-Louis. The government of Quebec has done a lot for its infrastructure. Premier Charest has just announced almost $3 billion for the road infrastructure, and the previous federal government understood that municipal infrastructure is important and had transferred the gas tax. Why is there no infrastructure plan coming forward from the Conservative government? The Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, let's be clear. That previous Liberal government did nothing but leave us with a $130 billion infrastructure deficit across this country. You know that. We know that. Canadians know that. Mr. Speaker, this government is getting results. $33 billion, the most ever allocated towards infrastructure. We are getting positive results for Canada. We have to clean up the mess those Liberals left us with.
The Honourable Member for Beauharnois-Salaberry. Mr. Speaker, yesterday, Quebec Statistics Institute confirmed that the manufacturing sector since 2005 is no longer the one with the greatest number of jobs. This means 69,000 jobs that were lost in that sector in Quebec since the Conservatives took office. What extra evidence does the government need to prove that Quebec and its manufacturing sector need an improved plan involving $3.5 billion from the surplus of $10.6 billion for this year? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, it's obvious that the Bloc Québécois doesn't understand the manufacturing sector. For that reason, they will never be able to help the sector. If the Bloc had done their homework, they would know that almost 18,000 new jobs were created in January in that sector. Unlike the Bloc, this government supports and helps that industry. The Honourable Member for Beauharnois-Salaberry. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc understands full well the manufacturing sector, and the workers will prove that during the next election. The Bloc Québécois has been asking the government to act seriously for the past year now to support the manufacturing industry and its workers. When net exports from Canada are dropping because of the economic slowdown in the United States, the government should realize that the manufacturing sector needs more than $1 billion over 3 years to help find its way through this crisis. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Industry. Mr. Speaker, this is the reality. How many jobs has the Bloc created? 0. How many jobs will the Bloc create? 0. This government, the Conservative government, is here for the workers and for communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Verchères Les Patriotes. Mr. Speaker, yesterday began the 26th edition of Rendez-vous des Cinémas in Montreal. This government still doesn't acknowledge that the market share has dropped since the Conservatives took office because of a drop in funding for Quebec cinema that has hindered production. Will the Minister of Heritage pressure the Minister of Finance to ensure that the feature film fund will be increased by $50 million in the next budget? The Honourable Secretary of State. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the question, and I will have a word with the officials at Canadian Heritage in order to find an answer to the question as quickly as possible. The Honourable Member for Verchères-les-Patriotes. Well, I'll give him another suggestion. For some years now, documentary feature films are highly prized. Les Valeurs d'Enfance, Le Dernier Continent, and other films have had a great success. When will the documentary envelope increase by $10 million? And can documentary producers count on the support of the government in the next budget? The Secretary of State. I see that the Honourable Member is very passionate about this, but he will have to wait for the budget, which will be brought down later this month, and I hope he will support the budget because there will be tax breaks and investments for Canadians, including Quebecers, and I encourage the Honourable Member to wait to see what's in the budget.
South.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, Linda Keane has decided to begin a lawsuit since she was dismissed last month, and the Minister of Natural Resources has broken the rules, and Ms. Keane doesn't intend to keep quiet. Since there is nothing to blame her for in exercising her duties, how will the government defend the indefensible? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Great things about this country is that we have access to a fair court system, and Ms. Keane has taken the opportunity to access that. So, because it's before the courts, that we have no comment on this individual issue.
Honourable Member for Ottawa South.
Prime Minister falsely claimed Linda Keane was a partisan hack. He wanted her to do his political bidding, but she wouldn't. And then he dispatched his ministers to bully her and violate the independence of the regulator's office. Shameful. Still, she did her job. When that didn't work, they wrote threatening letters to pressure her to break the law, but she wouldn't budge. Ms. Keane's firing has already cost Canadians confidence in nuclear safety in this country and around the world. How much is it going to cost Canadians for this government to defend itself against its unbelievable incompetence and stupidity?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, Mr. Speaker, one thing that was clear is that there was a health risk that existed for Canadians. Right. The Liberal Deputy Leader himself called this a national medical crisis. You supported him. Parliament made the decision to act. It was the right decision. Now the opposition wants to rewrite history. Through this whole time period, they've been trying to take different positions each week. We've acted. Parliament acted in the right way. We protected Canadians' health, and Canadians have thanked us for that.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton-Canso.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians have discovered that the Prime Minister is not just a nuclear safety expert. He fired the National Science Advisor, so he must be a science expert. He fired the Environment Commissioner, so he must be an environmental expert. He fired the Information Commissioner, so no, that's a bit of a stretch, isn't it, Mr. Speaker? Why does the Prime Minister fire any public servant that will not bend to his will?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, that's certainly not the case, and we have been proceeding in a fashion. We are hiring very capable people, very capable appointments. The folks that he's talking about, half of them were did not leave their positions in the way he described. Some took their retirement voluntarily, and I don't think it's appropriate for him to tarnish their reputations with the way he's made those comments.
Right. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton-Canso.
Well, what we know, Mr. Speaker, is during the last campaign, the Prime Minister said he would not be held back by this country's professional public servants. Well, it didn't take him long to launch the Seek and Destroy mission against anyone who would dare stand up to him. Add to the list the President of the Law Reform Commission, the Ethics Commissioner, the Chief Electoral Officer, the Information Commissioner, the Chair of the Board of Immigration and Refugees. Mr. Speaker, the list goes on and on. How long will the captain of the good ship Pink Slip continue his vendetta against independent experts?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very saddened at this desire by the member to disparage the reputation of individuals who served the public well, took their retirement on their own basis, and to suggest for some reason they had to be fired when they did not get fired in any way. Bernard Shapiro, the Ethics Commissioner, his position was actually extended before he resigned, effective March 31st, 2007. The Chief Electoral Officer, he retired on his own. He himself said there was no political interference.
I see.
The Information Commissioner, John Reid, his term was actually extended past 7 years before he retired.
The honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton. Order.
Mr. Speaker, recently Yasmin, a 17-year-old girl from Afghanistan, spoke about the improvements her country is experiencing due to the support of NATO and the Canadian government. Yasmin said, "Life is getting a little bit better. There are still explosions and bombs, but it is not like it was before. There is definitely more freedom. Our government believes in the importance of development. Can the Minister of Foreign Affairs tell us why assisting in the development of this war-torn country remains vital?"
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member from Sarnia-Lambton for that compassionate question. The truth is we are helping millions of young women and women across Afghanistan, like Yasmin. We are enabling them to go to school, Mr. Speaker, millions more girls in school. We've heard of support of 1,500 women to develop home-based gardening. Microfinance credit is readily available throughout the country. Mr. Speaker, we know on the Democratic side that many young people, millions in fact, are now registered to vote in free and democratic elections in that country. Parliamentarians, 25% of parliamentarians in Afghanistan are women, Mr. Speaker. Development dollars into health and education, Mr. Speaker, across that country also.
The honourable member for Western Arctic.
Mr. Speaker, in the throne speech, this Conservative government said it would protect Arctic sovereignty through several means, including, I quote, improving and devolving governments so that Northerners have greater control over their destinies. The Premier of the Northwest Territories was hopeful last month that the Prime Minister would want to discuss devolution of governance when they met. Returning from that meeting, he said, devolution is now on the back burner. Northerners know this Conservative government's promises are hollow. When will the Prime Minister show leadership and do the things he promised?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
We have made that commitment to devolve government in the Northwest Territories. In fact, we are prepared to return to the table as soon as the territorial government indicates its interest in doing so. This is a commitment that we've made, and I believe it'll be mutually beneficial for the people of the Northwest Territories and Canada.
The honourable member for Western Arctic.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I hope this proceeds in due course in the next while. Mr. Speaker, examples of how this Conservative government has failed the people of the North is as much ballyhooed improvements to the funding formula for the territories and its lack of any attempt to negotiate a resource revenue sharing agreement with the public and Aboriginal governments of the Northwest Territories. The result, the GNWT is now facing budget cuts of up to 13%, with attendant losses of essential services and jobs. This is hurting the North. When will this government start working on a fair deal for the people of the North?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question as it does give me an opportunity to highlight the incredible efforts that we have made in the North. In fact, this Prime Minister has led our government in a way that we've put a focus on the North that hasn't been seen since the Diefenbach era. In fact, our government is extending a massive amount of interest to protect the sovereignty of our North. Of course, through our equalization improvements, Northern territories are receiving a financial incentive to continue with their negotiations in Canada. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud of the efforts we've made.
The honourable member for Malpeque.
Wednesday night, during an emergency debate in the livestock industry, the minister had an opportunity to propose concrete, immediate action. But incredibly, he remained voiceless. Might it have been a prime ministerial gag order? Oh yes, the minister's minions spouted the same old lines about the useless December announcement. In fact, the Canada Pork Council called that plan, quote, a cruel joke to their producers. Today, Statistics Canada has confirmed what the government refuses to hear. We are losing our livestock industry. will the minister come out of hiding and...
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Got that right? Or is it Minister of State?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we seem to be getting just the opposite feedback that this member seems to be getting from our agricultural community. You know, after 13 years of neglect, finally farmers are being put first by this government. Here's the feedback. Here's the reason we're getting such positive feedback, Mr. Speaker. They're very happy with the $4.5 billion for program payments in 2006. They're also very pleased with the $600 million that's coming and is being paid right now under Agri-Invest Kickstart. $76 million to help farmers combat the hog disease. They're very, very pleased. And
the Honourable Member for Malpeque.
I just wish the minister would take the blinders off, Mr. Speaker. This minister has authority to act under the Family Farm Protection Act, but they seem just intent on destruction, destroying the Canadian Wheat Board, eliminating farmers' interest in the Grain Act, allowing the tender fruits plant in Ontario to die on the vine, and missing an action on livestock, allowing beef and hog producers to face financial ruin. Is the minister only interested in destroying rural Canada, or is the real reason for not acting the incompetence of the Minister of Finance to handle the finances of the nation?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Mr. Speaker, I find it incredible that that question would come from this member. He has had an opportunity over the last 13 years to help rural Canada, to help our agricultural community. He did absolutely nothing. Farmers were in a disastrous situation. Can I go on, Mr. Speaker, with what we're doing? $400 million to cover farmers' increased input costs. $200 million eco-agriculture biofuels capital initiative. $145 million for the agricultural byproducts innovation. It goes on and on, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable
The Honourable Member for Hull-Elmer. Order. Mr. Speaker, when the Canadian Postal Company put Saint Jean-Baptiste on its calendar, this was a Francophone holiday. The Prime Minister Cabinet said that this was unacceptable. Today we find out that the calendar set by the Treasury Board and by the Minister of Finance also omits the importance of June 24th for Franco-Canadians. Does the Minister believe that omitting the Baptiste Day is acceptable? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of State. No, not at all, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for underscoring or pointing out this issue. The Saint Jean-Baptiste Day is a historic day in Canada for all Canadians, not just French Canadians. It's a very important date that should be indicated on all calendars, like all other official holidays for provinces. I recall that under the Liberal government, there was a calendar that missed Easter and Christmas on the calendar. So yes, this needs to be rectified. The Honourable Member from Madawaska, Restigouche. Mr. Speaker, the attitude of the Conservatives goes from contempt to insult. The Treasury Board calendar and for the Minister of Finance is insulting Francophone employees. Not only have they omitted Saint Jean-Baptiste Day, but they're also ignoring Acadians. Like the 24th of June, this government ignores the Acadian Day on August 15th, another demonstration of the lack of respect of this government for Francophones. Do the Conservatives believe that Acadians don't deserve to be recognized? Is that the Conservative approach? The Honourable Secretary of State. Mr. Speaker, we can see in the Liberals this tendency to play politics, to try and divide our society on just about any issue. Obviously, we agree that these days are important. They're historical days. They should be recognized, and the government will review the policy that we inherited from the Liberal government. But I would remind the member that this Prime Minister insisted on celebrating Acadian Day last year and the year before. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, the troops in the riding of Vacher-Radion ask for assistance because they are receiving none whatsoever. In January, they've been in Afghanistan, leaving young families behind, and sometimes these people are very sick and need help at home. Will the government accept to help this family who has been on its own since January 4th? The Honourable Minister of National Defence. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I can like to thank my colleague for the question. Our government and our Canadian forces attach a great deal of priority. We're always interested in helping families of soldiers. If the member gives me the specific details of this situation, we will try to help them. Quiet, I'm answering. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Another case of negligence with respect to soldiers. This soldier came back from the riding of my colleague from Joliette. This soldier was assigned as a bodyguard to security at the Canadian Embassy in Kabul. He's not entitled, like the 33 other colleagues, of tax treatment that other soldiers get. The government recognized its mistake but refused to correct it retroactively. Will the government overturn its decision for these 33 soldiers? The Honourable Minister of National Defence. I would repeat, Mr. Speaker, we're always interested in helping our soldiers. It's unfortunate that the member has elected to raise this question here in the House of Commons. Perhaps he could take a productive approach and work with the government to come up with a suitable approach.
North Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government made a commitment in its first platform to fund an additional 2,500 municipal police officers across this country. Well, Mr. Speaker, it has been 2 years since that announcement was made. 2 years, but still nothing, Mr. Speaker. Where is the money for the Conservatives promised for the additional 2,500 municipal police officers and make our communities a safer place to live in this country?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Well, Mr. Speaker, a lot has happened. One of the observations that we made upon taking government was that the previous Liberal government had drastically reduced resources, not just to our armed forces, but in fact to our security and safety forces and policing agencies right across the country. We've turned that around, Mr. Speaker. 1,000 more RCMP officers, the funding to see those individuals trained is well underway and taking place right now. And also the commitment for 2,500 more police officers municipally across the country. That's on a cost-shared basis. We've had great discussions with federal provincial authorities on how that's going to work, and the money's in the budget.
The Honourable Member for Burlington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this week, the Liberals made it clear that tackling violent crime is not a priority for their party. When it came time for them to stand up and vote to help get the tackling violent crime passed by the Senate, they got scared and they fled the House. Next week, this bill will continue to be studied by a Senate committee. Mr. Speaker, can the Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Justice tell this House why it is so important for the Senate to expedite this bill?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable Member for his question. I also thank him for his steadfast support for laws that will protect Canadian communities. As my colleague mentioned, the Tackling Violent Crime Act remains in the Senate. Every day that goes by is another day that 14 and 15-year-olds remain vulnerable to sexual predators, that the police lack the tools they need to tackle impaired driving. It's one more day that dangerous offenders can roam our neighbourhoods. And I hope, Mr. Speaker, as the Honourable Member does, that when it comes time to vote in the Senate, that the senators will not slither out of their chamber, as members did in this House.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to tackling the manufacturing job crisis, the Conservatives can't be trusted. Well-paid jobs with decent pensions and benefit packages are disappearing, and it's hurting Canada's economy and our communities. In London and southwestern Ontario, working families and our communities have been hit hard. In the last few months, London has lost 5,000 good jobs from places like Siemens, Beta Brands, Vitec, and across the auto sector. The government aid package is clearly not enough, and the money is not flowing fast enough. Will the government speed up the process so that working families can get the help they need immediately?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Industry.
Mr. Speaker, I find it quite hypocritical that this NDP member pretends to care about workers. Every time this government brings something forward, for example, last year the industry report, 22 recommendations for manufacturers. It was a unanimous report supported by a critic. She and her party voted against it. They voted against the capital cost allowance write-off for manufacturers. $800 million a year for education. They voted against it. $1.3 billion for research. They voted against it. $500 million a year for training. They voted against it. $33 billion for things like the Windsor-Detroit border and our infrastructure. They voted against it. They should be ashamed of themselves.
The Honourable Member for Sault Ste. Marie.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians' confidence in the economy and this government is heading south. We on this side helped convince the government to immediately fund communities hurting in the forestry and manufacturing sector. You finally agreed. They didn't have to wait for the budget. Now, when will the communities in Northern Ontario see this money? They want to know what the process is to follow. What's the hold-up?
Good for you. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Industry.
Mr. Speaker, this government took action. We listened to the community, we listened to this House, we put the new $1 billion Community Development Trust, and it's going to provide job training in sectors where there are labour shortages, economic development to create new jobs in affected communities. For older workers specifically, we're going to put $72.5 million targeted initiative for older workers. Mr. Speaker, we're listening to the communities, we're getting the job done, and continually we're not getting any cooperation from that party.
The Honourable Member for Sydney Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, the disabled community in Canada is frustrated, waiting for the $45 million that was promised to them for the Enabling Accessibility Fund in 2007. Now, the objective of this fund was to help improve accessibility in communities, remove barriers, and improve awareness for disability issues. Why is this government denying the help for those who need it the most? Show us the money.
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources and Social Development.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the question. It's a serious issue. Of course, this government did announce in Budget 2007 the Enabling Accessibility Fund. On top of that, Mr. Speaker, under the leadership of the Finance Minister, we announced other supports for persons with disabilities. And last spring, I was pleased to announce $222 million more in labour market arrangements with the provinces to help persons with disabilities. The sad thing is, Mr. Speaker, it was that member and his party who voted against all of those measures to help persons with disabilities.
The Honourable Member for Kings Hants.
Speaker, the Liberal government invested $55 million in Toyota's Woodstock plant to create 3,000 new jobs. In January of this year, the Ontario government committed to $30 million for the Ford Essex plant to create hundreds of much-needed jobs in Windsor, Ontario. The project is on hold, waiting for matching investment from this Conservative government. Why has this government gone AWOL while we're losing the Canadian auto sector jobs? When will they stand up for and invest in good Canadian jobs?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Industry. Order.
Speaker, the truth is the Liberals walked out on the auto industry 13 years ago, just as they walked out of this House this week. It's a shame. The auto industry had 5 asks for the Liberal government. And what did they do? They took zero action. Our government has moved ahead on those 5 acts. We followed ahead on our investments, our infrastructure for the Windsor-Detroit border, convergence of regulations, science and research investment for development, human resources. And what did this party do? This party voted against it. When they had the chance to stand up for the auto industry, what are they going to do?
L'Honourable Député.
The Honourable Member for Vaudreuil-Soulanges. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Kosovo province is declaring its independence, but many European countries, including the United States, are are supporting this country. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, can he tell us what position the Canadian government intends to take with respect to recognition of Kosovo's independence? The Honourable Minister of National Defence. That's a good question. We are waiting for the results of an election. Canada has always participated in this type of activity. We've had discussions with NATO and with the other members of the international community. We are waiting for the decision results in Kosovo.
That will conclude question period for today. L'ordre, s'il vous plaît.
Order, please.
Rule on the point of order raised on Monday, February 11th, 2008 by the Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party concerning the admissibility of Government Motion Number 4, standing on the order paper in the name of the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons and Minister for Democratic Reform. I would like to thank the House Leader for the New Democratic Party for raising this matter, as well as the Honourable Member for Mississauga South and the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government in the House for their contributions on the issue.
The House Leader for the New Democratic Party argued that the preamble of Government Motion Number 4 amounted to a series of arguments that are really debating points. This, she said, is contrary to the practices of this House, which don't allow for motions to be put in the form of a speech or to include argumentative clauses. In support of her argument, she quoted Beauchesne, 6th edition, citation 565, as well as House of Commons Procedure and Practice, page 449, which states, quote, "A motion should not contain any objectionable or irregular wording. It should not be argumentative or written in the style of a speech." Unquote. In addition, she expressed concern about the procedural viability of the motion due to its length and the fact that it includes conditions that are outside the control of the House.
Since the House Leader for the New Democratic Party requested that the government either withdraw motion number 4 and replace it with a motion reworded such that the offending parts are removed, or, failing any indication on the part of the government that it would do so, that the chair rule this motion inadmissible and allow the government to present a new one. The member for Mississauga South agreed that the preamble to the motion was tantamount to argument, which instead should be raised during the course of debate. He added that in his experience, preambles are discouraged, and contended that allowing debate to proceed on this motion in its current form would set a precedent that could lead to some degree of confusion with respect to the procedural acceptability of motions placed on notice in future. In his submission, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government in the House pointed out that, in fact, there have been examples of motions that were very broad in scope, and that on that basis the motion in question is procedurally appropriate.
In some respects, the House is not unfamiliar with the arguments raised in this case, as the whole notion of the procedural acceptability of motions containing preambles has been raised several times in the past. A survey of relevant precedents, as well as of relevant rulings, reveals that the House has debated numerous motions that were accompanied by a preamble.
Reach far back into our parliamentary history. The Parliamentary Secretary correctly referred to a fairly recent example regarding distinct society, which occurred on December 6, 1995, In the last session alone, there were 2 supply day motions that are especially pertinent to the present discussion. The first, standing in the name of the honourable member for Bourassa, dealt with Canada's involvement in Afghanistan and was debated on April 19, 2007. The second on the same subject was, as the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary pointed out on Thursday, February 14, 2008, sponsored by the Honourable Member for Toronto Danforth and was debated on April 26, 2007. Both these motions contained a preamble of considerable length made up of several clauses not unlike those contained in Government Motion No. 4. Their procedural acceptability was not contested. This is consistent with the ruling given by Mr. Speaker Michener on January 16, 1961, on page 1074 of debates, where he indicated that it, and I quote, "it is amply established that a preamble is in accordance with our practice." Dans cette décision, le président Michener.
In that same ruling, Mr. Speaker Michener also dealt conclusively, although with some reluctance, with the issue of length, when he went on to say, quote, "The use of the preamble can lead to absurd lengths." By way of example, I have only to cite one instance, which I found in 1899, of a motion the preamble of which covers 21 pages of the journals. It is, I might say, a procedural monstrosity, but there it is as a precedent, unquote. Clearly, the procedural acceptability of motions is not gauged by their length.
Inclusion of conditions in motions, it is perhaps useful for the Chair to remind the House that it is not the Speaker's role to judge the effectiveness of proposals brought forward for debate. As House of Commons Procedure and Practice states at page 448, a resolution of the House makes a declaration of opinion or purpose. It does not have the effect of requiring that any action be taken, nor is it binding. The House has frequently brought forth resolutions in order to show support for some action." End of quote. The Chair is therefore not in a position to conclude that the inclusion of conditions in the motion currently in question renders it inadmissible. Rather, they are simply an additional aspect of the issue contained in the motion that honourable members will need to consider as they debate and ultimately decide. Under the circumstances, I must conclude, therefore, that Government Motion No. 4 is admissible and may be proposed to the House in its current form. Cela dit,
that being said, the point raised by the Honourable Member for Mississauga South regarding his experience that preambles in motions are discouraged is one into which I will inquire further. In the meantime, this is certainly an issue the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs may wish to look into, with a view ultimately to making recommendations.
I thank the Leader of the New Democratic Party the House Leader for the New Democratic Party for bringing this matter forward and to the attention of the House. Tabling of documents, dépôt de documents. Dépôt de projet de loi.
Introduction of government bills.
Mr. Day, seconded by Ms. Finlay, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Customs Act. This motion is deemed adopted. Monsieur Day, appuyé par...
Mr. Day, seconded by Ms. Finlay, moves that this bill be now read a first time and printed. The motion's deemed adopted.
Reading of this bill, première lecture de ce projet de loi.
When shall the bill be read a second time? I think at the next sitting of the House. Dépôt de projet de loi émanant...
Introduction of government bills.
Ministers. Rapported...
Reports from interparliamentary delegations.
Presenting reports from committees. The Honourable Member for Perth Wellington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have the honour to present in both official languages the fourth report of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage requesting an extension of 30 sitting days to consider Bill C-327, an act to amend the Broadcasting Act, reduction of violence in television broadcasts, and the fifth report of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage with respect to copyright legislation. Thank you.
With respect to the fourth report of the Standing Committee, pursuant to Standing Order 97.13a, a motion to concur in the report is deemed moved, the question deemed put, and a recorded division deemed, demanded, and deferred until Wednesday, February 27, 2008, immediately before the time provided for private members' business. Présentation de rapport.
Presenting reports from committees.
Honourable Member for Wetaskiwin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the honour to present in both official languages the fourth report of the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights. In accordance with the order of reference of Friday, November 30th, 2007, your committee has considered Bill S-203, an act to amend the Criminal Code, cruelty to animals, and has agreed on Thursday, February 14th to report it without amendments. Thank you.
Présentation de rapport.
Presenting reports from committees.
Of private members' bills. Mrs. Matheson, seconded by Ms. Bell, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Implement the Recommendations of the Pay Equity Task Force. Cette motion est répétée.
The motion is deemed adopted.
For London, Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, the right to pay equity is protected by the Human Rights Act and Charter. However, current complaints-based pay equity laws don't work. It takes years for these complaints to be addressed. Canada needs proactive pay equity legislation to ensure that all employees are receiving equal pay for work of equal value. In 2004, the Pay Equity Task Force called current pay equity legislation woefully inadequate, recommended a new law, and provided a detailed guide for proactive pay equity. My bill would use this guide to make proactive pay equity the law. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mrs. Matheson, seconded by Ms. Bell, moves that the bill be now read a first time and be printed. Cette motion est répétée.
The motion is deemed adopted.
Reading of this bill, première lecture de ce projet de loi.
When shall the bill be read a second time? À la prochaine.
At the next sitting of the House.
Seconded by Mrs. Matheson, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Nuclear Safety and Control Act. Minister. This motion is deemed adopted. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Vancouver Island North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to introduce today a bill to designate the Minister of the Environment as the minister that the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission must report to. Currently, the CNSC reports to the Minister of Natural Resources. The same minister, Atomic Energy of Canada Limited reports to. This is a conflict of interest for the Minister of Natural Resources, whose mandate is to promote nuclear industry. Canadians need to have confidence that their government is putting the needs of public safety and the environment ahead of the needs of the nuclear industry. This simple but effective change provides more ministerial oversight to the nuclear industry of Canada and moves CNSC into a ministry with a mandate more in line with its responsibility to protect human health and the environment.
Ms. Bell, seconded by Mrs. Matheson, moves that the bill be now read a first time and be printed. Cette motion est répétée.
The motion is deemed adopted.
This bill, première lecture de ce projet de loi.
When shall the bill be read a second time? À la prochaine.
At the next sitting of the House.
By Mrs. Matheson, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Employment Insurance Act and the Canada Labour Code, extension of benefit period for adoptive parents. Cette motion est répétée.
The motion is deemed adopted.
Vancouver Island North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm introducing this bill today, an act to amend the Employment Insurance Act and the Canada Labour Code to ensure that an adoptive parent is entitled to the same number of weeks of leave as a biological mother of a newborn child. Adoptive parents require time to bond with their baby or their child. In cases of adoption of an older infant or a child, it is essential to build that relationship. By providing the extra 15 weeks to an adoptive parent, this bill will allow them the time they need at home with their new child.
Ms. Bell, seconded by Mrs. Matheson, moves that the bill be now read a first time and be printed. Cette motion.
The motion is deemed adopted.
First reading of this bill, première lecture de ce projet de loi.
When shall the bill be read a second time? À la prochaine.
At the next sitting of the House.
Mr. Dewar, seconded by Mr. Martin, Winnipeg Centre, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting the Labelling of Food Products. Cette motion.
The motion is deemed adopted. The honourable member for Ottawa Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleague from Winnipeg for seconding this bill. I'm tabling a bill, Mr. Speaker, to improve Canada's food labelling practices and provide everyday Canadians with full disclosure of ingredients in the food items they purchase. The bill requires the mandatory labelling of the use of hormones, antibiotics, and rendered slaughterhouse waste in meat and poultry products.
and the use of pesticides or genetically modified organisms in all food products. When Canadian families put food on their tables, Mr. Speaker, they want to make sure the food is nourishing them and not making them sick. We want mandatory labeling on food products so that we know what's in our food. Both the current and previous federal governments have refused to improve the laws in order to give full disclosure of food ingredients to Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Dewar, seconded by Mr. Martin, Winnipeg Centre, moves that the bill be now read a first time and be printed. Cette motion est briefed.
The motion is deemed adopted.
First reading of this bill, première lecture de ce projet de loi.
When shall the bill be read a second time? À la prochaine.
At the next sitting of the House.
Private members' bills. Première lecture.
First reading of Senate public bills.
Motions. Monsieur Bélanger, yep.
Mr. Bélanger, seconded by Mr. Damour, moves that the second report of the Standing Committee on Official Languages presented Wednesday, December 12, 2007, be concurred in. Debate. The Honourable Member for Ottawa-Vanier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the pleasure today, with my colleagues' support, of proposing concurrence in a very important report by the Official Languages Committee. This report followed a number of meetings with a number of witnesses, and this took place over a considerable amount of time, and it led the committee to make basically two recommendations. But I think before quoting the two recommendations in question, I think it's important to look at some examples of the types of witnesses we heard, because that will show how serious the committee's work was on this subject. And that subject, of course, was the unfortunate and unjustified decision of the Conservative government to cut the Court Challenges program. To cancel it, in fact. As witnesses, we had someone who's well known here in the region and all across the country, Ms. Gisèle Lalonde, former president of the Montfort Association, she had very good things to say. And we also had people from the school board community in Quebec. We had Franco-Saskatchewaners. We had the Canadian Bar Association. We had the National Association of Francophone Parents. We had the Association of Francophone Lawyers, Common Law Lawyers, the Francophone and Acadian Community Associations, and other representatives from the Montfort Hospital. We had people who were former administrators of the Court Challenges program, Ms. Kathleen Tansik and others who were on the board of directors of the Court Challenges program. We had people from New Brunswick, professors from the University of Ottawa, legal experts, constitutional experts from the University of Moncton and McGill University as well. So basically, as a committee, we heard anyone and everyone who wanted to be heard.
And the committee's conclusion was a very simple one. There were two recommendations, and I'm going to read the first one. The first recommendation from the second report from the Standing Committee on Official Languages is as follows, and I quote, that the government clearly explain to the people of Canada the reasons that would justify its decision to abolish the Court Challenges program, end quote. And so, Mr. Speaker, this is a recommendation that's very clear, straightforward, and it should have provided the government with an opportunity to explain the rationale behind its decision. And they did try to explain on a few occasions. When it comes to abolishing the Court Challenges program, the response was that this was in a category, and the President of the Treasury Board made an announcement at the time. He's the member for Ottawa West Nepean, and the Minister of Finance as well had made an announcement, and they were quite proud to have abolished the Court Challenges program, and this came under superfluous expenses or useless expenditures or even a waste of taxpayers' money, which was extremely insulting for the people who had used this program. And this represented less than $3 million, and the results were wonderful for minority communities, not only linguistic minorities, but other communities. And that was 10 times less than what the government has spent this year on opinion polls and groups to determine public sentiments. So they more or less said that it was a waste of money, and that made no sense to us. And when we started asking questions in the House, because we couldn't accept the decision and the reason behind it, the Prime Minister and other ministers tried another tack. They responded by saying that the bills to be introduced here in the House will respect the Constitution. Now, that is an interesting argument, Mr. Speaker, but it's totally erroneous because, first of all, it isn't up to the government to decide whether or not its bills are constitutional. There are other parties or groups involved in this parliamentary universe that help us to govern, and that is the judicial branch. And it's not up to the government to decide whether or not its bills are constitutional or whether they respect the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We hope that the government will do its homework and check with these various bodies to see whether or not their bill will meet the Charter test. And this is using a legal term. But it isn't up to the government to decide. It's up to the legislators together here in this House and in the other place, and then the judicial branch has to rule. So if a government says that the reason why it's cancelling a court challenges program has something to do with bills that they will be introducing later that will not go against the Constitution is somewhat ridiculous. And there are other reasons as well. And not only because it's not up to the government to decide that. The aim of the Court Challenges program didn't only apply to government legislation that has been introduced recently, but to all statutes. We have 125 years worth of laws and acts, and when the Charter was agreed to, the Charter that we've been celebrating for the past 25 years, and we've had 25 years for our legal system to evolve, and this is because of decisions made by Canada's Parliament and by Canada's Supreme Court. It isn't because the government will say that they intend to introduce legislation that will respect the Constitution that we don't need a court challenges program, because there are other statutes and laws that could be challenged, and that is why we need a court challenges program. There are also provincial laws that we must take into account, because linguistic rights can be found in the Charter as well as equality rights, and these do not only apply to federal laws but provincial laws as well. So the whole provincial universe comes under this part of the challenges program. And even if the government were to introduce legislation from now on that respects the Charter and the Constitution, there are still provincial laws that we have to take into account. And there are bills that the government introduced after having cancelled the Court Challenges program, and these are being challenged in other places. For example, legislation that would change certain parts of the Senate. These are and will be challenged before the courts by the provinces. So when it comes to the Court Challenges program and its cancellation, the reasons really don't hold water, whether it be because of existing laws or federal laws or provincial laws. And there is another reason that I can give to explain why there is no justification for cancelling this program, and it involves decisions. Very often, there are decisions that are made by the government, and they must be challenged. And I can give you an example. In fact, I can give you a number of them, because these are things that have occurred after decisions have been made by governments, whether it be the federal government or provincial governments. And one of the most serious ones would be Arsenault Cameron versus Prince Edward Island. Prince Edward Island, the provincial government, has signed the Constitution and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and all of the linguistic and education rights that arise from the Charter, but the province refused to give its Francophone community its own schools, and thanks to the Court Challenges program, not exclusively, but in part, the community did take the province to court and won, and now the province has schools for its French language community because the scope of the charter was defined, and Prince Edward Island had to agree and ensure that the Francophone people of Prince Edward Island would have access to their own schools. And this is a very well-known case. It's the fact that the provincial government didn't want to build these schools that was challenged, and we won. We could also talk about Maillet versus Alberta, and this is a very important case involving school boards in Canada. In Maillet versus Alberta, the Supreme Court recognized the rights of parents belonging to a linguistic minority to manage minority language schools. And I'll give you another example of a decision. We're all aware of this one. I had the privilege of representing Ottawa-Vanier, where Montfort Hospital is located. And in this case, the Ontario government, Mike Harris's government, decided to close down Montfort Hospital, the only French language teaching hospital. It isn't the only French language hospital. We have one in Hawkesbury. We mustn't forget that one. But it is a teaching hospital, and Montfort was the only French language one. And once again, a decision was made by a government to do something harmful, something that would cause great damage to a community. And the fight lasted 6 or 7 years. We found ourselves before the courts, and once again the Court Challenges program had a role to play and helped the stakeholders win their case. There are other decisions as well. In that particular decision, there are references to other Supreme Court decisions. One deals with the secession reference, where it was written for the first time. I believe that there were certain principles underlying the Constitution which involved protecting minorities. And there was also a decision relating to Montfort, where another case was cited. And this was a Supreme Court decision that recognized that the Francophone communities in this country have fundamental rights. So I've just given a whole list of reasons why the government's statement to the effect that they wouldn't bring in any legislation that goes against the Constitution is totally irrelevant, because this isn't what we are asking for. We want a Court Challenges program that will ensure that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms will be respected. Now, we might wonder if this is because of poor management at the Official Languages Committee, where I had done the same exercise at the Heritage Committee as well, and we wondered whether it was because of bad management or a conflict of interest or perception of conflict of interest. And we demonstrated very clearly by calling witnesses and by looking at the way in which the Court Challenges program was managed that it was not the case. All of the assessments all of the audits proved that the program was well managed and well structured, and that there could be no conflict of interest whatsoever. And so we can only conclude, Mr. Speaker, that the Government of Canada, the Conservative government, for the second time, decided to cancel the Court Challenges program for purely ideological reasons, and that is very troubling. And it's for that reason that the committee asked the government to explain, and we're still waiting for an explanation. And there is a second recommendation, which is quite an interesting one, and I will read it as soon as I can find it here. I will quote it, Mr. Speaker, and that is that the Government of Canada reestablish the funding for the Court Challenges program according to the contribution agreement that was in force before it was cancelled in September 2006. End quote. Now, this is somewhat technical, but there's a reason behind this recommendation. And this involves the entire program, not only the language part of the program, but the entire program, because there were two parts to the Court Challenges program. About 1/3 of the budget, less than $1 million, was for language issues or cases, and the other 2/3, about $2 million, between $800,000 and $1.2 million, went for equality issues. And it's very important to remember that, because the parliamentary secretary for the minister responsible for official languages, the member for Glengarry Prescott Russell, had brought a resolution before the House to reinstitute some type of linguistic challenges program. But that's very troubling, because were they to do that, they would show their real reasons behind cancelling the program. I undertook this exercise, and I'd like to know how much time I have remaining, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. So we did a similar exercise during the first session of this Parliament at the Heritage Committee, and we met with a number of groups to speak about not only language rights but equality, about non-discrimination based on race or sexual orientation. And we heard from people representing those who are hard of hearing or disabled, and they told us that the program was of immense help to them. They won a number of cases. In fact, some cases were won shortly after the program was abolished. They won a case against Via Rail that proved that they didn't respect the charter because people who were in wheelchairs couldn't board the train. So this isn't theory. This is everyday life. And for Aboriginal women as well, there were cases brought before the courts supported by the Court Challenges program, and they won those cases. Wage equity as well. There are a number of cases in that area. Now, we suspected that that was the reason why the Conservatives had abolished the program. There was also the same-sex marriage issue, because some courts ruled that the legislation at the time didn't respect the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and that offended the most conservative elements in the Conservative Party. And we suspect that that is one of the reasons why they decided to abolish the Court Challenges program. And it's unfortunate, because this is an exemplary program nationally, but internationally as well. Canada was congratulated by the United Nations and by many countries because it was so forward-thinking in creating a Court Challenges program to help everyday citizens to avail themselves of their rights before the courts in their country. So why would they go and abolish this program? It's disappointing. And I'm happy to say, however, that we have a commitment from the leader of the official opposition. When we form the next government, not only will we reinstate the Court Challenges program and its funding, we'll double the funding. And I hope that I can convince my colleagues that it could be recreated so that in 30 years, if there's another Conservative government, they won't be able to cancel it a third time. We'd like to make it autonomous because Canada's Constitution isn't cast in stone. It's a document, it's a text. I believe that the Supreme Court described it as a living tree, and when a tree is living and when you want it to continue to grow and to live, you have to feed it. And our Constitution, our rights, the things that we do in this country were supported by the Court Challenges program, and I find it unacceptable that for a second time, because of a lack of open-mindedness or generosity, the government decided to abolish the program and refuse to explain their rationale because they have no rationale underlying this decision. And I hope that, along with my official opposition colleagues, we will be able to reinstate this program and continue to support it. Thank you. Questions and comments? The honourable member for Gatineau on a point of order. Mr. Speaker, could I have the unanimous consent of my colleagues to introduce one petition, please? It would be very brief. Does the honourable member have unanimous consent of the House for his motion?
The motion is at the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion.
The honourable member for Gatineau has the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I have a petition with 367 signatures. These Quebecers support Bill C-482 and demand that the federal government respect the Quebec nation and Law 101 in a concrete way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Simcoe North.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sorry I didn't get the entirety of the member opposite's remarks on this question of the court challenges. But, Mr. Speaker, this is a subject that has been covered in considerable depth by numerous committees of the House over this last year, and including the committee that I'm on, Mr. Speaker. One of the key questions that came out of that discussion was the fact that this was a program that initially was intended to help and support minority language rights in different communities right across the country. But in fact, Mr. Speaker, less than 10% of the challenges that were heard under this program, in fact, had anything to do with minority rights. I mean, minority language rights, if I can clarify, represented less than 10% of the challenges. So what has happened here is this program has, in fact, become blown up into something much bigger and different than it really was intended for. And I wonder if, Mr. Speaker, the member would have some comments on how this program lost its legitimacy in respect of minority language rights.
The honourable member for Ottawa-Vanier. Mr. Speaker, the program did not lose its legitimacy. I said in my speech that there were two parts to the program. The language part represented about 1/3 of the budget, and equality between men and women, equality of citizens before the law, represented the other 2/3 of the budget. And most of the cases defended through the Court Challenges program related to equality. Francophones and Anglophones who are in a minority in Quebec do support this other part of the program. It isn't true that they don't want it. Linguistic minorities have stated that they wouldn't want a program strictly for language because even in minority communities, even in linguistic minority communities, there are people who demand a right to equality. So that is hogwash. I don't think that is why the program was cancelled. I imagine that it's the homophobia that is shared among some members of the government or the caucus that wanted them to cancel the program.
The honourable member for Madawaska-Restigouche. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Initially, I'd like to start off by congratulating my colleague for Ottawa-Vanier for defending minorities throughout the country so that they have their rightful place. When In listening to my colleague's speech on the court challenge program, it is clear that the Conservative government has understood nothing about minority needs. Sometimes you say, well, they're going to, at one point, understand. The penny's going to drop. They're going to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But no, Mr. Speaker, one would say things are getting worse. When the court challenges program was cancelled, we turn around and what do we find out? We find out that the Francophone minority communities outside of Quebec are hard hit. And then we say, well, maybe it's just that one thing. But no, it goes on. I'd like to ask my colleague the following question. Do you think that the Conservative government has contempt for Franco-Canadians, for French Canadians? Because we found out that the Treasury Board calendar and the Department of Finance calendar have not ensured that the June 24th for Quebec is included on the calendar, and August 15th, which is the Acadian holiday, is included in the calendar. Other holidays are included, but on the government side, there was no respect shown for these language communities. That's contempt. Perhaps that we're just we're getting a clear idea of what the Conservative approach is. They eliminate minority rights. The Conservative approach shows contempt for French Canadians. And I'd like to ask my colleague whether my colleague for Ottawa-Vanier agrees with me. We can see that this is happening time after time again. But the Conservatives, what do? They always point fingers. They always say it's not our fault, it's someone else. But they show a great deal of contempt for French Canadians. The Honourable Member for Ottawa-Vanier. I've been in this House now for 13 years. This is my 14th day starting today, actually. 14th year starting today. And I always try to be cautious with what I say. But I don't know if my colleagues will like my answer, but I can say that it's not necessarily contempt, but it shows a lack of understanding. It could be interpreted by some people as contempt, but I'll leave it at that. But there is a lack of understanding about the tools that official language minority groups need. I'm part of this committee, Mr. Speaker. I had the honor to be minister responsible for official languages. I was a parliamentary secretary for official languages. So I did have an opportunity to really get into this file and understand the importance of the tools. But it is essential that these tools be there to help promote the rights of these communities. The Court Challenges program was vital, and Mr. Speaker, when the government abolished it, it didn't simply, it gave no other reason other than to say that it was wasteful. I'll get another argument I'd like. There was a vote in this House. Elected members voted, perhaps with one or two exceptions, have told the government that this program needs to be restored. And here I refer to the Court Challenges program. But the government doesn't care about the will of the majority. And that is a lack of respect, a lack of transparency, a lack of respect for democracy. Is that contempt? Well, I'll leave that to others to decide. But it can be said that they are very insensitive and that they don't understand the needs of linguistic minority groups. Questions and comments?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the opportunity to question the member yet again. Mr. Speaker, I mean, some of the comments we've heard from members opposite in regard to contempt, I mean, this is nonsense, Mr. Speaker. This is a government that, in fact, has pledged and is actively looking at and, in fact, hearing comments from Canadians right across the country on the re-examination or, in fact, the re-entry of an official languages program. The former Premier of New Brunswick is just about ready to report on that, as I understand. This is a commitment to Francophone language rights to official languages right across the country. And here we have a program, you know, Mr. Speaker, the Court Challenges program, the size that it is, the members would have us believe that this was somehow the epitome of equality challenges in Canada. Mr. Speaker, Canadians have many, many avenues that they can explore to bring these kinds of questions, not excluding bringing these issues right before their own members of Parliament. And I would ask the member, how would he not suggest that there are, in fact, so many other avenues that Canadians can use to bring these important questions in front of the government, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Member for Ottawa-Vanier. Mr. Speaker, once again, the government doesn't understand the very essence of the program. The Court Challenges program was created to ensure equal access to justice because going before the courts costs money. The member opposite says we have other programs and people have access to these programs, and equally so. That's not the case. There are some communities that need financial assistance in order to have access to the justice, and that's what the Court Challenges program was all about. It created equal access. The member opposite talked about Mr. Lord's consultation. I don't know if his report, I was told that, I read in the paper that the report's been tabled. Let's hope that the report will be made public. But the invitations to consult were limited. You could only be invited if you, and it was, the sessions were in camera, and the sessions were determined in advance by Mr. Lord. I know this because people told me about this. And people raised the issue of Court Challenge program. Does Mr. Lord have the courage of reflecting, of saying what he heard? I hope so. I hope he's going to talk about the need to have this program. But we haven't seen how the consultation process took out. We didn't see any opposition members who were invited to the consultation. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Prime Minister and Status of Women. Mr. Speaker, our government is playing its role. We are working with citizens, provinces, and territories in order to protect our heritage, including our official languages. Our government recognized the need to promote official languages in Canada and the importance of linguistic duality. Our achievements and commitments, as detailed in the speech from the throne, demonstrate that this is the case. During the last census, it was apparent that the results are forthcoming. There are much more bilingual Canadians now. They can express themselves both in French and English. Let's talk about the commitment of the government with respect to official languages and the future of the official languages plan. I would like to focus on the official languages program under Heritage Canada. This program focuses on teaching of minority languages, second language learning. We have agreements with provinces and territories, and we promote the use of both official languages in communities. I would like to look at each of the targeted programs. Teaching. The teaching of official languages is one of the pillars of our official languages program. There are two objectives: improve access to studies of francophones and anglophones in all regions of Canada, and double the number of young Canadians who, at the end of their secondary studies, have adequate knowledge of their second official languages. Over the past 35 years, the Government of Canada has been assisting provinces and territories and trying to get them to assume their obligations with respect to official languages. This relationship is detailed in a 5-year plan that is reached between the government and the Ministers of Education. From 2008-2009, the federal budget of more than $1 billion will be earmarked for this. Our
Investments are added to those made by the territories and provinces and have enabled us to implement a minority language teaching program. The investment in this sector enabled us to keep as many students as possible in the second language institutions and provide Canadians with the opportunity to get high caliber education in the language of their choice. The department also helped contribute to second language learning training, and it is providing programs to those who are entitled to receive services in their official language, second official language. We have promoted the development of students using through arts, through pedagogical tools, and we have encouraged access to post-secondary studies as well. Our investments have helped us to develop communication tools that will improve the competencies of students. In addition, the Department of Canadian Heritage has spent $80 million per year on second language training. More than 4.3 million young Canadians can learn their second official language. Everyone agrees that bilingualism is an asset for all Canadians in our country. More than half of the students in our country learn French or English as a second language. We need these young Canadians to be bilingual so that we can maintain this capacity in our institutions, provide services in both languages across the land. In 2006, the Department of Canadian Heritage entered into various arrangements with the provinces and territories. The delivery of public services comes under provincial and territorial jurisdiction. These agreements call for service delivery for second language communities, particularly in the areas of legal, health, and the economy. The budget is $13 million per year, or $65 million over 5 years. In 2003, there was $14 million spread over 5 years. Services for the Anglophone minority were also pointed out as being needed, and these have been improved over the years. Another envelope was spent to help organizations that develop minority linguistic communities. Over the past 30 years, the Department of Canadian Heritage has supported minority communities throughout the country. In addition, our investments have allowed thousands of Anglophones from all regions of Quebec to keep their culture thanks to the services provided by community organizations. Financial aid from Canadian Heritage spent on the language minority networks and supported by various provincial, territorial, and federal arrangements have been very beneficial. The current budget with the community sector is $36 million per year, including additional funds added in 2003. Today, the members of these communities are able to transmit their culture and language to the next generations. We also see that learning a second language is becoming more popular amongst young people who are aware of the opportunities that they will be given personally and professionally. These initiatives are just but a few of the accomplishments of our government. Further to the consultations, our next strategy for official languages will be announced. It is important to spend the time needed to have an effective plan, and that's what any good government would do, and that's what we are doing. Our government presented a bill entitled A Law to Amend the Criminal Code, access to official languages in criminal cases. This bill has just been adopted. Thanks to this initiative, we give Canadians the tools they need to improve their lives in the medium and long term. In this way, we're making our society fair, more prosperous for all Canadians, regardless of their language, religion, culture, or any other feature that defines it. We have choices to make. Sometimes they're difficult on the way to best serve our citizenry, but Canadians can be reassured that we make all these decisions very seriously. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Madawaska-Restigouche. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague opposite for her speech. However, when we listened to what she said in her speech, she said that education was so important for our young people so that they could improve themselves. But when you take a look at education for Francophone minority groups throughout the country, this is not all that clear. It's all well and good to make a nice speech and say that it's important, but the reality is that our communities don't always have access or the opportunity to have education in their language. Why? Well, they always have to fight to have their rights respected, to ensure that their young people are able to go to the school of their choice. And often this school, they choose to go to school in French. I would ask my colleague opposite that she list one case where minority groups outside Quebec have managed to get education in their language. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, with all due respect, with all the respect that I have for my colleague opposite, I will not talk about this particular case because it's before my case, but I would say this. We have set aside $37 million in the 2000 budget, and you voted against it. And you're saying that you fight for official languages? Questions and comments? Before recognizing the Honourable Member for Ottawa-Vanier, I would like to remind the Parliamentary Secretary that she used to speak in the third person and not directly.
The Honourable Member for Ottawa-Vanier. I listened to the member give a list of numbers. Must have got up to hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion. But my question is, why then was 2.7 million cut? That 2.7 million for the Core Challenges program. If you're willing to spend hundreds of millions and even $1 billion, why cut 2.7 million? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, I would answer my colleague opposite that we had forecast 30 million in the last budget and you voted against it. And that, Mr. Speaker, the official language minority communities will remember that.
Ils ont voté contre.
They voted against. The Honourable Member for Argenteuil-Papineau-Mirabel has the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to take this opportunity to ask the same question again. Why eliminate the $2.7 million that everyone wanted if she says they were willing to fund to the tune of so many millions? Why? Why cut such a small amount? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary has the floor. Mr. Speaker, I would answer my colleague that our record is much better than theirs. We have a record of many millions. Theirs is zero. Questions and comments?
L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a question for my colleague on the Court Challenges program. The member from the Liberal Party asked why a program was eliminated when it only cost $2.7 million annually.
Did we cancel a program that was $2.7 million a year? And, Mr. Speaker, I think there is an argument to be made that after almost 3 decades of jurisprudence in this area that the program had helped build a foundation of case law to support not only minority language rights, official language rights, but also other rights as protected under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And so my question for my colleague is does she concur, does she agree that this program had been in place for a number of decades, had been there for almost 3 decades, and had substantially built this foundation in case law, and therefore it was no longer needed as it was back in the 1970s when it was originally introduced?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, I'd say this in answer to my colleague. When it comes to spending taxpayer money, we've always attempted to improve people's lives, and we do this in concrete, well-thought-out ways.
Questions? The Honourable Member for Western Arctic.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to follow along the lines of questioning that came up earlier. The question of whether we've moved along with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Charter of Rights and Freedoms represents one of the most important aspects of Canadian culture. It's a defining fact of our society. We've had it in place for a bare number of years. The complexity of the decisions around the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is not getting simpler, it's getting more difficult. The need for court rulings on many of the aspects of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is actually probably in some ways moving from more simplistic forms of challenges to more complex forms. And wouldn't that suggest that we need to put dollars towards this type of activity? We need to support Canadian citizens in their search for rights and freedoms, just as we support countries in other parts of the world in their search for rights and freedoms.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary has the floor. Mr. Speaker, our government has played a leadership role. We've invested a lot of money in minority communities and will continue to do that. We're currently working on the second phase of the action plan, and once that's prepared, people will know what we've done in actual fact for minority language communities. The Honourable Member for Beauharnois-Salaberry. Mr. Speaker, the Parliamentary Secretary and I have had a number of discussions, and I know that she's very sensitive to Francophones. She lives in a Francophone area, and I have a hard time understanding. I'd like her to explain why, after hearing from lots of associations from outside Quebec, Francophone organizations, who've called on the government to fund this Court Challenges program that helps them keep their language in Anglophone provinces, for example, can she explain why, if she's so sensitive, why her government and she herself are completely insensitive to the issue of Francophones outside Quebec? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. To the Prime Minister and the Minister responsible for the status of women. Mr. Speaker, I'd answer my colleague from Beauharnois that when you form a government, you make well-thought-out decisions, carefully considered decisions, but you make decisions. The Bloc has never made any decisions. They never will. They can say whatever they like. But when you can't even dream of taking office, you can say anything and everything.
The Honourable Member for Malpeque. 1 minute left for both the question and the answer.
Okay, Mr. Speaker. There's one thing that the Parliamentary Secretary that is absolutely right on, and that is that their record, she said, is better than others. But in the area that it's said, it's in the area record of destruction, Mr. Speaker, on policies and programs that matter to people. I don't know whether she was listening earlier when I talked about how they're trying to destroy rural Canada through loss of individual mail delivery, through destroying the Canadian Wheat Board, through undermining the Canadian Grain Commission, by default on hogs and beef, and yet they're destroying our international reputation.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary has 20 seconds to respond.
Hogwash.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are hardly in a position to lecture us. Resuming debate. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-La Petite Patrie. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Look, Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to take part in this debate, especially following that speech, which was full of nonsense or hogwash, as I heard a minute ago, because I think that demonstrates that this government is far from attempting to protect minorities. As if giving communities the tools and the funding to challenge, and I'm talking about Francophone minorities, as if that was something that shouldn't be done in Canadian society. So it's regrettable, quite regrettable, to hear the Parliamentary Secretary speak and indicate that her government makes well thought out, carefully considered decisions. Because that decision, in fact, in September 2006, to cancel the Court Challenges program, that was not a carefully considered decision. It was a thoughtless decision, a careless decision, and it has real consequences. It gives Francophone communities less ability to defend their rights, to promote their development in provinces where they're in the minority, where they constitute 2%, and we constitute 2%. Francophones make up 2% of the population of North America. But this government refuses to see that this minority status requires constant battle for recognition, not only from this government, but also by the courts. So when I see this government proceeding with the cancellation of a program and saying that it's a carefully thought out decision, and whenever we make decisions about taxpayer money, we have to carefully assess the goals and objectives of the program, well, that raises a number of questions. What did those savings make possible? What did canceling this program save the government? A measly $5 or $6 million. $5 or $6 million in savings to the government by canceling this program. And yet, Mr. Speaker, since 1970, the government has kept on giving the oil industry tax breaks to the tune of $66 billion. They keep on giving tax breaks for oil sands development and exploration. If you listen to the government, that's apparently a carefully considered decision. It's a socially thought-out decision. It's giving a helping hand to those who are destroying our environment, but to give a measly $5 or $6 million to Francophone communities for them to be able to defend their rights in court, that's apparently unacceptable, and that would be reckless. Mr. Speaker, that really sets the tone. That shows what this government's aspirations are for Francophone minorities, whether it's Aboriginal or Francophone minorities, or even organizations that promote women, the status of women. This government decided, without any debate, to quite simply cancel the Court Challenges program, which was beneficial to a number of organizations. And Mr. Speaker, the Federation of Francophone and Acadian communities didn't just give up there. They didn't just shrug and give up. They know that that money is essential to the very survival of these communities, the Acadian community, Francophone communities. And so that association decided on October 25th, 2006 to file an application in federal court to invalidate the government's decision to cancel the court challenges program. That legal application, that legal challenge in federal court to quash that decision has been supported by many organizations, movements, and associations, including the National Association of Francophone School Boards, the Federation of Francophone Common Law Lawyers, the National Commission of Francophone Parents, and the Quebec Community Groups Networks. So, Mr. Speaker, it's fundamental. When you live in a minority setting, in an environment that's 98% English speaking, it's essential to have tools available to you to defend your rights. In order to ensure that future generations will be able to go on speaking French here in Canada. So there's no linguistic loss over time. Because these children of Francophones and Acadians have to be able to hand down their linguistic heritage to their children and grandchildren. That, Mr. Speaker, is worth more than $5 or $6 million. Doesn't the government think that that's worth it? What they're saying is that $5 or $6 million is needed to balance the budget. And in order to balance the budget, they actually need to cut the rug out from under Francophones when they've got a surplus of $11 or $12 billion, and when they're going to keep on giving the oil industry tax breaks. Mr. Speaker, I think this government's choice is not actually a budget choice. It's not a financial choice. It's not a fiscal choice. It's an ideological choice. That's the knee-jerk reaction of this government. They want to make sure that Canada, which in principle is made up of 2 official languages, and part of the population conveys its culture, knowledge from generation to generation, those generations will no longer be able to defend themselves. They'll have limited means to defend themselves, but they deserve to be defended. The federal government instead chose to cut the Canadian Federation of Acadians and Francophones is of the opinion that by cutting funding to court challenges, the federal government has not sufficiently had regard to the impact of the decision on the development and growth of Francophone communities in minority settings. Nor has it paid sufficient regard to its obligations toward Francophone communities under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Official Languages Act, because the duty of the federal government, both nationally and internationally, this government boasts to the rest of the world that we're a country made up of 2 official languages and we support our Francophone communities. And we feel that language diversity is a part of the wealth and richness of Canada. When they speak to the rest of the world, I've been in this parliament for 10 years. And I've participated in many Canadian delegations abroad. And every time the minister responsible boasts about being part of a country with 2 official languages, whether it was the Liberals or the Conservatives, these successive governments have always bragged that there were 2 official languages. But when the time comes to protect those communities, well, suddenly we can't afford to. We can't afford to help these people defend their rights in court adequately, regardless of the historical contribution of Acadians and Francophones in the building of Canada. That, Mr. Speaker, is the heritage that the Conservative Party, the legacy that the Conservatives would leave the Francophone communities. Well, I have one thing to say, Mr. Speaker. The next time I take part in a Canadian delegation and a minister from this Conservative government stands up and boasts about being from a country with 2 official languages, well, I'm going to condemn him. I'm going to say that the situation's fragile, precarious, and a minority situation, and every day it's in jeopardy of assimilation. I'll remind everyone that this government cut $6 million for the defense of these communities, $6 million that would have given Francophone communities the means to defend themselves, whereas the Charter of Rights guarantees them these rights, and the Official Languages Act guarantees those rights for Francophones too, Mr. Speaker. The government claimed that the program was ineffective, and that's how they justified canceling it. They decided to cancel the program, stating that the program wasn't profitable. That was the Parliamentary Secretary's position. She said we have to make sure that taxpayers' monies are administrated properly. That's what she said. They felt that this program was not effective or efficient. Since when has a program to protect more minority rights had to be profitable? Since when has pure economics applied when it came to helping Francophone communities? This is not a program, it's not a business, Mr. Speaker, that we're running here. It's a budget. And if at times it's not profitable, well, the benefits that this program brought to those communities, being able to depend on a full answer and defense, that's worth its weight in gold, Mr. Speaker. It's not money and profits, as the government's trying to make us believe. They're talking about the profitability of the program. Well, it contributes to the enrichment and the survival of Francophone communities in Canada. And the federal government decided instead to abandon Francophones and French-speaking Canadians and to pull the rug right out from under those communities. Mr. Speaker, on the contrary, this program was useful to French language communities, minority language communities. It allowed them to develop, survive and develop, but the Court Challenges program was, the cancellation of that program rather, hits hard at communities' ability to defend their rights. And these are not my words. This is not the member for Rosemont-La Petite Patrie speaking. This is what the Official Languages Commissioner said. The Court Challenges program, the cancellation, is a real blow to the ability of Canadians to defend their language rights. And I would add that Ms. Fraser estimated that the government has not taken into account the repercussions for official language minority communities and didn't take that into account before making its decision. There was no assessment, no evaluation of the impact. And yet when it's time to evaluate programs in any department, the government, through Treasury Board, when the Conservatives took power a few years ago, Treasury Board was mandated to examine all programs, to review all federal programs, from transport to natural resources to environment. And there was an impact assessment done. But when it came time to assess the impact of canceling the Court Challenges program, well, it was no longer the same approach. And the Commissioner of Official Languages was quite clear about this. The cancellation of the Court Challenges program was a real blow to Francophone communities. And the investigation showed that the government did not take into consideration the repercussions of its decision on minority language communities. Mr. Speaker, in addition to suing the government, which I mentioned earlier, on October 25, 2006, the application in federal court, the Francophone and Acadian Community Federation took this case to federal court, and Francophone communities and Francophone citizens of Canada have not stopped there. They decided to complain to the Commissioner of Official Languages as well. They felt that their rights had been violated. They made complaints. Over almost 1,000 complaints have been filed with the Office of the Commissioner, including 117 complaints dealing directly with the Court Challenges program. So the communities haven't just sat back and put all their eggs in one basket, the federal court application. They also decided to lodge complaints, to file complaints with the Commissioner of Official Languages, official complaints, and in our view, those complaints are justified and justifiable. The funding available from a number of groups was an effective way. The funding, rather, that had been made available to many groups had been a very effective tool, particularly when it came to defending the rights of Francophones. In language rights cases, a number of major, significant precedents were created in Canadian law, and these were huge contributions to official language minority communities in Canada. I'll talk about a few cases. There was the Husser-Rouleau case, the Montfort Hospital case as well, Mr. Speaker, the Arsenault-Cameron versus PEI, the creation of equal quality educational institutions. These have applied in a number of provinces and territories: Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, Labrador, New Brunswick, the Northwest Territories. If it weren't for the Court Challenges program, Mr. Speaker, the equal school boards in a number of provinces probably never would have seen the light of day. So, Mr. Speaker, the impact of the cancellation of the Court Challenges program on French-speaking communities in minority settings is a disaster. In recent months, groups, and particularly historically disadvantaged groups and minority French language communities, have appeared as witnesses before the committee, the Standing Committee, and they've come to talk about the cancellation of the Court Challenges program. And, Mr. Speaker, they expressed the advantages that the Court Challenges program had brought them in recent years. So, Mr. Speaker, I call on the government to take note of this recommendation that calls on the government to explain clearly to Canadians its reasons for cancelling the Court Challenges program. Today, based on the explanations from the Parliamentary Secretary from the Quebec City area just a few minutes ago, her explanations were far from clear, far from acceptable. She talked about good management and profitability. Are those the only reasons they have? They're talking about the inefficiency of the program, and so they're going to cancel it on that basis, regardless of the consequences for Francophone communities? For us on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, that's unacceptable. Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's very important to say that the Court Challenges program was created in 1978. It's important to point out that the Court Challenges program was the subject of intense public debate in Canada. The Official Languages Act of 1969 and the Quebec Charter of the French Language in 1977, and a certain number of important court cases, major court cases affecting language rights. All of these things contributed to situating language rights in the forefront of political debate in Canada. And Mr. Speaker, it's very important to point out that the purpose of the program was to clarify a certain number of constitutional provisions regarding the right to equality and language rights.
Remember why this program was originally created some 30 years ago, and it was to establish a foundation of case law to clarify not only linguistic rights, but other rights guaranteed under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And here we are 30 years later, and there is a strong argument to be made that the law, in fact, has been clarified. Obviously, the law is a living organism and will continue to evolve, but the substantive base and case law has been established in this country defining these rights, and I think that's an incredibly important thing to remember. So I'd ask the member opposite if he acknowledges that there's an argument to be made for this and that there was good reason in that sense to move with the cancellation of this program.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. He has 1 minute to make his comments.
Mr. Speaker, no. The arguments put forward by the government aren't justified, and they aren't justifiable either. When a Francophone community, when Francophone communities and Francophones in North America only represent 2% of the North American population, then we must acknowledge the fact that if these minorities want to survive and pass from one generation to the next all of their linguistic heritage, then they have to have the means available to them. This applies to the Official Languages Act that protects Francophones, and it also applies to the legal means that have to be provided to Francophones to have a proper defense. So the government's It is my duty to interrupt the debate on the motion at this time. Therefore, the debate on the motion is deferred to a further time. And when we debate this report another time, there will be 6 minutes remaining in questions and comments.
Consideration of private members' business as listed on today's order paper.
Second reading of Bill C-454, an act to amend the Competition Act and to make consequential amendments to other acts. In the name of Mr. Godet. The Honourable Member for Montcalm is not present in the House to move the order according to the notice in today's notice paper. Therefore, the bill will fall to the bottom of the order of precedence on the order paper.
131. The House stands adjourned until Monday, February 25th, 2008, at 11 a.m. pursuant to Standing Orders 28.2 and 24.1. Je vous souhaite une bonne semaine.